Let's check out all 8 games that debuted for the Nintendo 64 in its debut in 1996.
Hello!
From that moment, Charles Martinet's Mario's voice is what stabilized that voice for being Mario for the rest of time. It really is. Now, I spent far more time on this title screen than I should have when I first played this game. Maybe you did too. Now, Mario 64 with the Nintendo 64 ruffled a few feathers for its time because when you bought a Nintendo, for the most part, it came with Super Mario Bros. You bought a Super Nintendo, it came with Super Mario World. So you would have figured the Nintendo 64 would have come with Mario 64. It didn't. Nintendo 64 didn't come with any game, so if you wanted to play something, you had to pay separate. The good news is Mario 64 is an awesome, awesome, awesome game. It put Mario in a 3D landscape. I remember seeing photos of this in magazines, and I was just like, man, I can't wrap my head around how it works. Like, do you still move left and right and you can move forward and everything moves with you? I couldn't figure it out. I just couldn't fathom what it would look like until I saw it being played at a pre-release thing at a local Blockbuster. Even though the controller was a little weird, when I started using the analog, where if I moved it a little bit, he would walk. If I moved it more, he would run. Oh man, I was like, okay, this can work. This can work. I loved the fact that this game gave you reason to go back and play through the same levels. There's plenty of opportunities to grab your stars, and then plenty of reason to go back and explore some more, maybe discover some new stars, or discover some new secrets. Certain enemies and items, and just other elements of what we have in Mario games today, all stemmed from Super Mario 64. There's a reason a lot of people consider Super Mario 64 as their favorite Mario game of all time. I don't blame them. I don't necessarily agree with them, but I also don't blame them. It's an excellent game. To me, it's still fun to play today. Question I have is, at the very beginning, when you talk to your Lakitu, who says, hey, I'm gonna be your camera guy, who's the one controlling the camera in the first little bit? The world may never know. The second launch game for the Nintendo 64 was Pilot Wing 64. Pilot Wing 64, admittedly, I was far more interested in than Super Mario 64, just because I was such a big fan of Pilot Wings for the Super Nintendo. You know, I'll never understand why they didn't just call this guy Ness. I mean, he looks just like him from Nintendo Power. This game features a few different elements of gameplay, just for fun. You got your hang gliding, which has you floating around a little bit. You know, you can find these little thermal currents. I like the fact that the thermal currents were more environmental. In the Super Nintendo one, it was a little strange to, I mean, it just looked like puffs of smoke and you just have to hope that you're hitting the right target. This one made it a little bit easier for you, I think. And hang gliding to me on this one is far more fun than the Super Nintendo hang gliding one. I didn't care for the Super Nintendo hang gliding thing at all. The best thing, of course, without a doubt, had to have been the Rocket Pack. In different elements on the Rocket Pack too, you can hover with your trigger buttons and everything, or you can, go faster, go slower. And now that we're in 3D polygons and not just flat land like the Super Nintendo version was, you had like this whole area that you could explore. I thought it was wonderful. I loved it. You do have a limited amount of gasoline, so I mean, you can't just be doing that all the time, but still a lot of fun to check out. And then in lieu of the light plane, you have the gyrocopter. And I was like, oh, I like the light plane. But the gyrocopter, maybe a little bit better because it controls kind of like an airplane, I guess. But then it has other things you can do. There's other missions later on too where you have to like destroy targets and all that too. So that's one of the things that made this game interesting. Not just the different areas you could travel to, or not just the different areas that you had challenges in. I liked the fact that different levels might have alternate missions. Like with the hang glider, maybe you have to like get to a certain place in a certain amount of time. There also might be ones where you have to like take a picture. You can actually go in and go to camera mode and take a picture of whatever they want you to take a picture of. It's kind of fun. After waiting a little while, we had Mortal Kombat Trilogy. Mortal Kombat Trilogy coming to the Nintendo 64. Mortal Kombat, another one of those, a lot of people have a lot of opinions on it. I'm not great at it, so I don't enjoy it as much as most other people enjoy Mortal Kombat. I think a lot of people purchased this game just because I was like, oh my god, finally, a third game for the Nintendo 64. It's not that the game's terrible, it's just that trying to control this game with your Nintendo 64 controller doesn't make it a very optimal experience. Like they didn't have a great arcade controller yet for the Nintendo 64. So cool to see, nice lineup, it's Mortal Kombat, one of the biggest games for its time. But just combining Mortal Kombat, putting it on the Nintendo system, I know they've kind of got past the, we can do blood and stuff like that now. However, just trying to play this game with that Nintendo controller, not great. I know people love this game, it's just not for me. But it did come out in 1996, so we gotta talk about it. Hey, and trust me, if you loved Mortal Kombat, you let me know in the comments. Now this was a game I was looking forward to with the water mechanics of Wave Race 64. Wave Race 64. It was just cool because I hadn't really seen water mechanics like this yet. So you combine this to kind of a decent racing game. You know, as we're going around the tracks, you have to go, you know, either on the left side or the right side of some of these beacon things. What's funny is I was super interested in this because of the water mechanics, and the water mechanics is also what prevents me from being any good at this game, because I can never use it to my advantage. But still looked very cool for its time. I like the, you know, the different tracks and the different, you know, levels and stuff like that too. There's also a stunt course you can do, and it makes it kind of a fun experience. Still a decent racing game. You got the multiplayer going on with this as well. It's Wave Race 64. It's one of those, it's like as soon as it came out, you had to grab it. And I'm glad I did. Well, we got the licensing game with Wayne Gretzky's 3D Hockey. Did you grab this too just because it was one of the few games available for its time? I don't know a lot about hockey. But I do know that this game's actually pretty decent. When it comes to hockey games, when it comes to hockey video games, it's actually not so bad. Nice controls, fast action, arcade-paced, just, you know, goal after goal, or, you know, something like that. It's just you just keep going, you just keep having fun, you just keep playing. Doesn't have the largest lineup of teams you can choose from, but it has enough. And easy to control, easy to figure out, even if you're not the biggest hockey fan. This one actually played pretty well, I thought. Yeah, believe it or not, it's like a hockey game I didn't mind. We hit 130,000 subscribers! If that's you, drop me an email and leave a comment. I'm going to be sending something your way. If you haven't done so yet, make sure you're subscribed. When we hit our next goal, I'll do another giveaway. Got our next fighting game with Killer Instinct Gold, and I like this one a little bit more than Mortal Kombat. I'm still not very good at it. And fighting games seem to have kind of their gimmicks, if you would. Street Fighter 2, it's all about the throwing fireballs and doing your special moves and all that. With Mortal Kombat, yeah, a little bit of that, but it also has the fatalities involved too. To me, Killer Instinct was all about getting those multi-hit combos. You just get those massive combos, big-time combos. You ever go to a place like a Safeway grocery store where they have like the Chinese food section and you ask for a Supreme combo in the voice of a Killer Instinct, so you ask for a Supreme Combo or something like that. You ever do that? No, just me? Okay. Now the fun of this game, I mean, when in doubt, button mash. You might be doing pretty good if you button mash. I mean, yeah, of course this game has some special maneuvers too, but so much of this game is just trying to get those huge combos, those big combos that they can't break, that they can't avoid. That's what makes this game pretty awesome. And when you're stuck in that, man, it's embarrassing. It happens to me all the time. I mean, Killer Instinct, it's a fun to check out, of course, and man, it's pretty cool. I may not be great at it, but I still have fun playing it. The game a lot of people were looking forward to with the Nintendo 64 was Cruisin' USA. What a fun arcade game this was, an arcade-style racer. And what I mean by arcade-style racer is it's just over the top. You're not really worried about physics so much, or realism, like in a Gran Turismo. In something like this, you're just looking for just insane chaos, driving as fast as you can. You know, like when you hit a car, it's completely unrealistic of what would happen if you hit a car, but maybe that's what makes it fun too. The Cruisin' series, beloved by many. Nice that it has, like, you know, like the 3D polygons, but then also, you know, just how everything else looks in this. So, you know, you're going up and down the hills and everything like that. Or you just have, you know, the trees on the side, which are more like just, you know, static photos that kind of follow you and stuff like that. You're just going for a drive, buddy. You're just going for a drive, and lots of scenery in this game too, lots of levels to unlock. Another one you can do multiplayer on, so you and a friend can have some fun with this one. Cruisin' Blast. I think that for its time especially, a must-have for sure. The game I was really looking forward to checking out, Star Wars Shadows of the Empire, puts you in Star Wars. Now along the way, since Star Wars has been around since literally 1977, we've had Star Wars video games. We had the vector-based arcade game, the Atari games, the Nintendo games. You know, the Super Nintendo games were actually pretty decent, but this was the Star Wars game I was looking forward to, because it puts you into the action. I mean, the very first mission you do, the very first thing is you're on Hoth, and, you know, you're doing the snow battle and stuff like that, where you're shooting down, you know, the enemy guys. Like, oh my god, when you could wrap up, you can use your tow rope to wrap up the dudes and they fall on their face and all that, just like in the movie. Man, it's so awesome. And it gives you a couple of different camera views too, like you can go inside the cockpit to maybe make you aim better. You can do behind the view, you can do the cinematic, which is super confusing, but still looks kind of cool. And then when you're on foot too, and this is when it turns into like a shooter style game, where you're, you know, running around and, you know, you're killing the other enemies, the snowtroopers, the stormtroopers, whatever the missions happen to be at the time. Super, super fun. It's a little dated today. When you try playing this game today, you know, the controls don't move like what controls you're used to now from back then, since this game only has one analog and then it has those weird C buttons and stuff like that, but you can still kind of figure it out, and there's a lot of aim assist. There's a ton of aim assist on this game, so you don't have to necessarily be facing them to shoot them. As long as you're shooting kind of near them, you hit the target more often than not. So it's not so bad on this game, but still fun to explore, fun to play. I still like to play. I go back to this game every once in a while. I know it's a little dated, but still gotta love Shadows of the Empire. Here are the games you were playing back in 1997. We get the new 3D upgraded Mario Kart with Mario Kart 64. Now, a lot of people already loved Super Mario Kart, so the fact that we have Mario Kart 64, it made it a must-buy when it first came out. Now, the Super Nintendo one did itself as proud as it could with the Mode 7 and all that, but this one you can actually have, like, you know, full polygon model buildings and stuff like that. Same concept, same old school idea, just go around the courses, you pick up your items and use them against your enemies or on yourself. And with the addition of the Nintendo 64 being a 4-player console, this also included a 4-player battle option. Now, battle option was always my favorite part of Mario Kart, and the fact that you could do 4 players at the same time, man, it made it awesome. How about Turok Dinosaur Hunter? I know I played a ton of this one. Well, I was loving the fact that I didn't have a computer good enough to run 3D games like this. You know, I had a bunch of friends who were into computers who were playing games like Doom and stuff like that. So this was like one of the first experiences I could play. It also ruined how I play these kind of 3D adventure games for the rest of my life, because you had to use the C buttons to maneuver, and then your analog was to look around. So it was kind of flip-flopped of what you do today. I did get used to it finally. It was cool because it had like not only guys but like dinosaurs you had to kill too. Not that that's the fun part, but the fact that, you know, you had dinosaurs who were like, you know, running up on you, chomping on you. You get that first-person view to see, you know, how big they are in real life and stuff like that. Weapon upgrades. I mean, again, for the time, it looks archaic, and well, maybe it kind of is. But for the time, this was amazing. It was like, you know, playing a fantasy here. If your fantasy is shooting dinosaurs. Blast Core. Now this one was pretty fun. It was fun because you gotta break stuff. You gotta make stuff blow up. What's not fun about that? There's different kinds of missions too, like, you know, the first mission is when you're, you know, this tanker's going through, but you need to destroy and to demolish anything in its way. Yes, sir, can do that, no problem. Well, that's what made it kind of fun anyway. There's other little side games you can play on this game too, you know, like just like other destroy things, drive around in different vehicles. And that was kind of the draw to this game too, not just let's drive around and break a bunch of stuff, but you could hop out of your car and then hop into a different car to use that, or not even, sometimes a robot to break the other stuff. And if you get careless, then, well, too late. Blast Core was pretty fun, especially for its time. Doom 64, it was so cool to see that Nintendo 64 was releasing these games that were previously only on computers. And I wasn't a PC gamer, so it gave me a chance to play these games that I've heard about for so long, or at least a 64 version of it. This game is dark. I don't mean for its, you know, context or anything. I mean, it's literally dark. This game is kind of hard to see sometimes. I remember having to adjust the brightness of my TV to make it so I could at least see a little bit in this game. And Doom 64 was fine. Now, Doom was not the first style of type of game like this, but it certainly was the one I think that kind of took off the fastest, or most, or whatever way you want to put it. Just a first-person shooter, and so many games today still take influence from Doom back in the day. And Doom 64, man, it was its own thing, but still Doom and still fun. And if you're more of a Hexen person, well, no worries, because about a month later or so, they released Hexen on the Nintendo 64. I say it's a little bit like Doom because that's still that first-person perspective, but I love the fact that you have like your kind of spiked iron knuckles and you're just punching these creatures in the face. I mean, still Doom-like, where you have like your maze and your catacombs and you're running around and, again, punching creatures in the face. I love that. Star Fox 64 is many people's favorite Star Fox game still today. And this was one that had like a whole cartoon intro and stuff like that too. I was like, you can do this on a Nintendo 64 cartridge? That's insane. There's like full voice and stuff like that. One thing that Star Fox had that some of the other Nintendo IPs didn't have was you had like Mario, who had a couple of catchphrases that he would just kind of say over and over, and it was mostly just like yelps and stuff like that. And then you had Link from Legend of Zelda, who didn't speak at all. In this one, they had full voice and full characterization. It was like playing a cartoon with a decent shooter, not the best shooter of all time, but they made it fun, they made it Nintendo, and it's the reason that people still love Star Fox today. And Star Fox 64, definitely one of the best ones. And to a lot of people, it is the best one.
No! Those who cross Andross will die!
Anyone else couldn't wait to play Tetris Sphere just because it was like Tetris, but like 3D, spherish, whatever? Well, whenever a video game console launches, I always try to find a puzzle game, because puzzle games are that perfect game to go kind of in between the cool games, but puzzle games can have an unlimited gameplay value and stuff like that. And this game just played weird, it played awkward, it wasn't great, it wasn't that fun most of the time. You know, maybe, hopefully you rented it and not have purchased it. No other video games at the time mattered when GoldenEye 007 came out, because that was the game that everybody was playing. Very cool for its time, because you got that first-person perspective and you're going around and everything, but really, at the end of the day, it was all about that 4-player battle mode. And GoldenEye 007, you could do that 4-player split screen on your, you know, sometimes on a little 13-inch, you know, TV that you have, but it worked, and it still ran pretty good. I was a big fan of Extreme G. Not the biggest fan of Extreme G, but I certainly played it because I loved Wipeout on the PlayStation. F-Zero X didn't come out yet, but this one reminded me a lot of a Wipeout. Just like ridiculously fast, like faster than it needs to be. A couple of upgrades you can pick up here and there. But it was just another racing game you could play. And the fact that you could change the perspective to as if what you're seeing, so when you're going around corners, the whole screen kind of tilts left and right, well, that's hard to play that way. But cool that it gave you the option. Later in 1997, we had Mischief Makers. This is from Treasure Enix. The Treasure Enix games play like anime. I just love the art style, love the animation that these games always came with. This game, a little confusing, like when it first came out, because you're like, oh, it looks like a side-scrolling game. You kind of figure it might be, you know, might play like a Mario, or maybe even play like a Mega Man game or something like that. It plays like its own thing. I mean, the levels are a lot shorter than you would expect. And it's a whole lot of, like, not shooting stuff, but like grabbing stuff and throwing it, or grabbing something and throwing it yourself. This game certainly has a charm factor, but it certainly also has a learning curve factor. And once you figure it out, not so bad, but this game was kind of fun to check out. It was certainly unique, and I was like, oh cool, here's a Nintendo 64 game that's 2D. You don't need to, every game doesn't need to be 3D. We can bring it back to 2D, and it'll be just fine. Well, here we are. The Nintendo 64 has been out for about a year now. We still don't have a Tekken game. We're not going to get a Tekken game, but we don't have a Street Fighter game. But we do have Clay Fighter, and Clay Fighter is kind of familiar. Now you turn Clay Fighter, you turn it 3D. It's a 3D element, but you're still it still plays more like a 2D fighting game. Clay Fighter 63 1/3, I get it. I mean, it's the fun, it's the comedy, it's the, yeah, you know, all right. It was the thing to play. Maybe you rented it or something, but it was something to play in 1997. Well, we had Doom, we had Hexen, you may as well have Duke Nukem 64 now. I did play Duke Nukem 3D a little bit on my friend's computer when he had it. But to many people, this may have been their first Duke Nukem experience, and not a bad one. It plays pretty well on the Nintendo 64. You still get those famous catchphrases. I liked Duke Nukem because it took place in a proper city. So many other shooting games took place in, again, like, you know, like the depths of hell, or catacombs, or castles, or something. And this one's like, takes place on the street. So I can relate to that, go to the movie theater and stuff. But it has the Ash from Evil Dead and the Roddy Piper attitude, which made it kind of fun just to hear what he's gonna say next. And nothing wrong with this game. So now later in 97, you're already kind of done with Cruisin' USA, so now you have San Francisco Rush Extreme Racing. Dare I say, better than Cruisin' USA, because it is. Well, in my opinion anyway. It's just another racing game at the end of the day. It's another racing game, but I don't know, there's something fun about this one, and I don't know, maybe it's all the checkpoints along the way, or something. Fun. Yeah, it's fine. It's a racing game. What else can you say? Earlier in the year, we had Mario Kart 64. Later in the year, we had Diddy Kong Racing. Now, I prefer this over Mario Kart 64. I like the battle mode in Mario Kart 64 more, but as far as the racing element goes, I kind of prefer this one. It'd be kind of nice if they did this kind of like open world adventure element for a Mario Kart game. Kind of like how they do for Splatoon, where you can like walk around or, you know, whatever. Like in this one, you just kind of drive around and then you go through the door to get to the next stage. Well, a lot of their other 3D platformers kind of played like this too. So you can see where to go, but maybe you can't go in that race yet until you get enough, you know, things to get through. Balloons in this case. Again, same concept of a Mario Kart. You just zip around these corners. You get some upgrades too if you'd like. But the fact that you had a few different modes of transportation where you had your cart, there's even like hovercraft levels where it's like, you know, so you got a little bit of a wave race idea going on. That's kind of fun to do, the hovercraft. And then my favorite, and maybe yours too, was the fact that you actually fly too. why not just fly all the time? You could have a kart racing game and have them all be airplanes or gliders or something. That's kind of fun. Diddy Kong Racing was pretty sweet to have. Diddy Kong Racing was pretty sweet to play. Nothing wrong with remaking a classic and putting it on a 64 here, Bomberman 64 now. And Bomberman games are great because they all stem from that original battle mode. But then they start doing like story modes and stuff like that too. And this one plays a little bit like a 3D, non-platformer, but a 3D game where you can use your bombs to open doors and kill the enemies that are around there. So you still get the Bomberman vibe. But you have the enemies that are walking around too, and you can flip the camera around too. It's one of the great things about these 3D polygons, is you can flip the camera around so you can actually see what's going on behind the building that you can't usually see yourself. But still, when in doubt, if you grab this game, chances are you used it for the 4-player battle mode. Not exactly like the other Bomberman games, but it still had its own thing going on. And it was still super fun because it was just, you know, old school Bomberman, but in 3D and with the twist and the different levels you can choose from. And again, 4-player simultaneous Bomberman, and you don't even need an extra adapter or anything like that. You gotta love that. WCW vs. NWO World Tour blew my mind. Many people, this was their first Aki Engine experience. Now, I played another one that was an import game on the PlayStation before this one, but this was like, okay, cool. We actually have this in America now. And this is 97 WCW, so you got guys like Sting, you got guys like Ric Flair, you got guys like Rey Mysterio, got guys like Retracted, you got guys like Steven Regal. Such a great lineup here. And you got a bunch of NWO guys too, like Hollywood Hogan? Hollywood, okay. And the Versus the World is because this was an import that had like a Japanese lineup as well, like the bootleg Japanese lineup. So you got guys like Atsushi Onita, there's Hayabusa, you know, Abdul the Butcher, stuff like that. Jinsei Shinzaki, you probably know better as Hakushi. And it was an easy to pick up and play game. Unlike a lot of other wrestling games, it was simple style. You got the longer you hold it, the more different moves you can do. You got your attack button, and they all have the same style, so you don't have to like relearn per wrestler. I mean, you have to relearn what moves each one does, but you can pick it up and play as anybody and figure it out pretty quickly. You'll know which button attacks, which button grapples, which button runs, whips them to the ropes. And a fun little thing about WCW versus NWO World Tour on the Nintendo 64, if you play versus Rey Mysterio, and you keep doing like a heel type maneuver that will like ruin their face, like you can use Ric Flair's eye rake or something here, you can eventually kind of remove his mask. You can rip his mask so you can see his face. Can't really see it too well. And you can probably do that for the other masked wrestlers in this game too. I've never really tried, but I know I used to do it to Rey Mysterio all the time just because I could. It didn't have the Royal Rumble feature yet in this game, but it was still super, super cool, and it was a great tide over until we got WCW versus NWO Revenge, which would come out the next year. If you're a big fan of No Mercy and stuff like that, it's cool to go back and see where this game was, and you can still play it just fine. I mean, you can figure it out easy. End of the year is here, and we get another Mortal Kombat game. Unfortunately, it's this one. Now, this one isn't as bad as most people make it out to be. Maybe it is, but it's not Mortal Kombat. If you remove the fact that it's not a Mortal Kombat game and have it just be it's a run around beat people up game that uses Mortal Kombat maneuvers, maybe it's not so bad. But I'm sure there was a lot of disappointed kids who got this for Christmas in 1997 and had to just pretend to figure it out. Thanks for subscribing. Let's check out some games for the 64. This is 1998, and we kick the year off with Robotron 64. Hey, a retro game coming new to the 64. Now, in the arcade twin-stick shooter on the Nintendo 64, well, I mean, it was like your analog stick controls you and your C buttons fire in the direction you want to shoot. And still, with the polygons and the 3D and all that, it was kind of a fun way to look at Robotron in a new way. I thought it was pretty good. Fighters Destiny came out. Oh, by the way, if you love 3D fighters, futuristic racing games, first-person shooters, this was a good time to have a Nintendo 64. We're going to cover a lot of those genres in this video. And Fighters Destiny was one of them. Fighters Destiny, it was an okay 3D fighter. I mean, there's a lot of 3D fighters at the time where it's like, oh, let's do another Tekken, let's do another Virtua Fighter. This one was interesting, though, because it went by a point system, so you would actually gain points instead of just, losing all their health, which works too, but you could gain points just by throwing them, and that's worth a couple of points. And when you get, like, so many points, then you win the match. I thought that was a pretty fun idea. Something new, something unique for a 3D fighting game. I mean, Jeopardy came out, but Jeopardy was on every system. But this Jeopardy was on the Nintendo 64. That's what made it cooler. I don't know, I remember playing Jeopardy. I still like playing Jeopardy. I'm not very good at it, but still. Yoshi's Story came out, Yoshi getting its own game for the Nintendo 64. The music grates on you. The sound effects grate on you. But you still kept playing it, didn't you? Of course you did. It was a Nintendo game made by Nintendo on a Nintendo console. You had to support those. And Yoshi's Story, I mean, you could play it with the sound down, I guess. But other than that, you know what? I've never played all the way through it, gotta be honest with you. But I did play it a little bit. I was like, okay, I get it. It's fine. It's Yoshi's Story. I liked how it was like presented like a pop-up book. I thought that was pretty fun. Snowboard Kids. Oh, there were several games that came out. For some reason, snowboarding games were very in during this time, and Snowboard Kids was a huge franchise. I thought it was pretty good. I've been snowboarding once in my life, literally once. I took some quick lessons, snowboarded once, and I was like, okay, fun, but not for me. Now, if it was an electric snowboard, I'd be all about it. However, Snowboard Kids was pretty decent. I think there was better 64 snowboarding games, and we'll talk about those later on in this video. I'm sure the one that you really like is coming up. And the one that I really like is probably not the one that you really like, but we'll talk about that when that time comes. We had Quake 64, and again, great time to have a console like the Nintendo 64 that can handle 3D, that can handle polygons, because I wasn't a computer gamer. I didn't have a computer. Well, that's not true. By 1998, I did have a home computer, but it wasn't well enough to play like 3D shooting games and stuff like that. You have to with the LAN connection, you have to like dial a phone number or something like that to play someone online. I mean, it was something, but I would just rather play the console games. I wasn't up to snuff with my computer abilities at the time. And Quake was a huge franchise. There's a lot of people who preferred Quake over Doom. So Quake 64 coming out is a good look for 64 owners for sure. For me, personally, I don't even know if I could tell the difference between the two. I was like, I played a bit of Doom, I played a bit of Quake. They're fine. I think I'll say that Doom had a better story, while Quake was more about the multiplayer. Is that a fair assessment? That's the way I kind of looked at it myself anyway. Rampage World Tour. This is the sequel I wish we would have had for the Super Nintendo. It blew my mind that we never really had another Rampage game for years, and Rampage was always a favorite of mine. And then finally we get Rampage World Tour, which is more Rampage, better graphics, more cartoony. They're really sinking into just how cartoony it is. And I think that's okay. You don't need it to be like superb graphics or anything like that. It still had a kind of a bit of that claymation style that was still kind of trending at the time. I thought that was great. I thought it was a lot of fun. 1080 snowboarding. That's your favorite snowboarding game, isn't it? Well, it's most people's favorite snowboarding games, and nothing wrong with 1080 snowboarding. It's all about doing those tricks and those turns and those whips arounds and stuff like that too. I could never get into it personally. I thought it was pretty good as far as a snowboarding game. But again, there's other snowboarding games out there. The snowboarding games I didn't just gravitate to because I wasn't a snowboarder or anything. So I played a lot of them all at once with no nostalgia to them. And although that one was pretty good, there's one I like even more coming up later. But 1080 snowboarding, it's one that a lot of people I think gravitate to as kind of the better snowboarding game. And I'm all good with it. Mystical Ninja starring Goemon. Again, a game I wish we would have had sooner, because I loved Legend of the Mystical Ninja for the Super Nintendo. Now, we only had the one for the Super Nintendo. In Japan, they had like 4, plus another like side story one. And now we finally get a Mystical Ninja game for the Nintendo 64. And I wish it played not better, because I knew what I was going into with a 64. Because I was like, oh, okay, cool. If it's going to be on Nintendo 64, it may as well be a 3D platformer, because that's what was in with the Marios and all that. So, okay, I get it. We're going to get a 3D game, which I'm all cool with. But there's still something missing to it, and I don't exactly know what it was. Was it the music? I don't think so. The comedy was still there, and there was still, they're kind of reintroducing the characters in a way. It just seemed empty. It was missing something, and maybe you can help me out on what it was missing. But it just seemed like maybe it was just, bigger worlds, bigger universe, but still missing something. I don't know what it was, but still fun to look at. That was one game I did own. Clay Fighter Sculptor's Cut. Did you ever rent this at Blockbuster? You know what's funny? I don't think I did. I'm trying to remember, and I remember seeing it on the shelf, but I was just like, oh, it's another Clay Fighters game. And it's like, when Clay Fighters first came out for the Super Nintendo, I thought it was a funny idea, rented it, okay, that's fine. And then even the second one came out, and I was like, I passed on it. And then the 64 version came out, and I was like, okay, it's more Clay Fighters. I'm good. I'm good. Wouldn't it be nice to go back and, when they started liquidating stock and picking up all the ones you could find at all your local Blockbusters, wouldn't that be something? BioFreaks was a game I tried to get into but couldn't. It looked interesting where you could like, again, 3D element kind of, and you could like have like rocket packs and boost along with your attacking and stuff like that, like versus others. It was something. I mean, and I'm sure there's people who love that game and really got into it. Again, maybe I just didn't get it. Maybe I wasn't the demographic. I'm not sure. Bust a Move 2, this is the arcade edition. I don't know why the first one wouldn't be the arcade one, but okay, here we are. Bust a Move 2 for the Nintendo 64. I loved seeing games like this on the 64 because, again, 1998, I was really into PlayStation imports, Saturn imports. I still had a 64, and I still enjoyed my 64 for a lot of the games. But I loved seeing that you could still do pixel graphics. Not everything needs to be 3D and all that. And just Bust a Move 2, it's what you know it as. Would I have enjoyed a 3D version of Bust a Move? Well, I mean, I kind of do, because they had one that came out for the Quest. It came out for VR. So it's like, that was all right. But man, it's just old school Bust a Move. This is not Bust a Groove. This is that bubble bobble puzzle bobble game. And I like it just fine. So fun to see. Aero Gauge, a futuristic racing game. This will not be the last racing game on this list. I promise you that. Aero Gauge was interesting because it looked a little like an F-Zero, or maybe even more like a Wipeout. But then you could also hover way above the track as needed to get to other, maybe like hidden tracks, or, you know, to go up to the curves that are up there. So you can, there's some strategy going on with a game like this. There's some technique that you can use. So you can either lay low and just follow the guide on the track, or you can also, you know, maybe find a hidden entrance to somewhere else too. With Aero Gauge, I thought it was a pretty interesting idea. We have Forsaken 64, and Forsaken was cool because, again, talk about 3D shooter, this is like an arena shooter. And I'm not talking about just on the ground. I mean, you're actually like flipping upside down and flying vertically along with horizontally. It's not just an XY axis, but it's like the X, Y, and Z axis to access all of these different angles with a game like Forsaken 64. This may have been a game that made some people motion sick. Now, I didn't suffer from motion sickness for a game like this, although I do suffer from motion sickness from other things. Not with Forsaken 64. The controls are rough, but once you get the controls down, you can maneuver pretty well. It just takes a little bit to figure out, like, hey, like which one is like up and down, as well as forward and backward. Again, once the controller becomes muscle memory, it's a pretty decent game. It just takes a while to get there. If you haven't noticed, I haven't really talked a lot about the sports games that came out for a lot of these consoles when I do these lists. Reason being, I don't play a lot of sports games. I don't play a lot of sports. I can't play baseball because of my eyesight. I can't play basketball. I'm tall, but I have no depth perception. But the sports games are usually okay. And one game I did have to check out was Major League Baseball starring Ken Griffey Jr. because it's Nintendo and it was with the Mariners. And we're all about the Mariners here in the Northwest, and especially Ken Griffey Jr. So I played it a little bit and I liked what it was doing, because before I would just swing the bat and hope for the best. I didn't know it was being thrown at me. I don't know. But this one has that little, that target box. So you can actually kind of maneuver to where, like, there's like, hey, I'm going to pitch here. And then you can kind of maneuver to swing right in that area, which I thought was really nice. And also with the Mariners, I liked how they captured and I'm sure the other players too for the other teams, which I can't comment on because I don't know who the other players are. But certain batters had certain stances, so it would actually match their stance. So like, you know, like Alex Rodriguez, who held the bat like way up here, like he's gonna chop down a tree or something like that. It was actually in the game, which was cool. And it has my beloved Kingdom, the good old Kingdom. Actually, I don't mind that we don't have the Kingdom anymore, but it was a piece of history, a piece of Seattle nostalgia. So you can actually, you can still play in the Kingdom on this game. Very cool. Quest 64. It only took them about 2 years for us to finally get an RPG on the Nintendo 64. And a lot of people have a lot of mixed opinions on this. Here's my opinion on this. It's an RPG, so it's like, okay, sure, whatever. However, there's a lot of people who are just like, they wanted it, but didn't, so they knocked on it because it wasn't Final Fantasy, it wasn't Dragon Warrior or Dragon Quest. But the people who really got into it really, really like this game. And so it might be worth checking out again, even when I was just playing it a little bit the other day, just to kind of remind myself some of these games. You know, I really should give it a go again. I mean, we didn't even have a Zelda yet on the Nintendo 64, and here we have Quest 64. And the name Quest 64 is hilarious, by the way, so it tells the story. But yeah, finally getting an RPG on the 64, and one of very few RPGs we would have on the Nintendo 64. We had Wetrix, and Wetrix was another one of those, wow, Tetris is popular, what can we do about Tetris to make more money from a different company, something or other? And with a game like Wetrix, it's not Tetris, but kind of sounds the same. And with Wet Tricks, you're dropping landmass in a way. Like you're either making the land rise or sink, and then sometimes water will fall, and you have to create little lakes with those kind of like you have to create kind of mountains and fill it up with water, and that's how you score the points in Wet Tricks. I don't know. I thought it was an interesting game. I remember renting it. Chopper Attack, interesting enough, was a game where you play as a helicopter. Believe that. 3D overhead helicopter-ish. Imagine like a Jungle Strike or a Desert Strike. Remember those games? Maybe a little bit like a cartoony version of that up close, so you don't see as much, if that makes sense. And there's like hills and valleys and stuff too, so you have to like go over mountains to, find the other enemies or the bases or things like that. It was fine. Mortal Kombat 4. Now, I kind of gave up with Mortal Kombat after Mortal Kombat 2. When I saw Mortal Kombat 3, I'm like, nah, I'm done. Mortal Kombat 4 drew me back in for a moment, because now it's in 3D. Kind of. It still controls like Mortal Kombat. It still has the same kind of maneuvers that you can do, still has fatalities, but now they're using 3D polygons instead of the image capture that they would do for the other Mortal Kombat games. So I was like, okay, they're actually finally get away from using the motion capture, and now they're just going to do whatever they want. Fine. And it played okay. Banjo-Kazooie was the next, not Mario game, but, 64 comes out, Mario 64, that's great. Again, 2 years later, we've had a couple of 3D platformers along the way, but not really. So then Banjo-Kazooie kind of scratched that itch with a new character, a new brand from Rare. Rare was one of the kings of the Nintendo 64. And now you can have a fun game with new characters, and Rare did it right for the Nintendo 64. And Banjo-Kazooie still stands the test of time, in my opinion. It's still pretty good. Once you get away, like if you're trying to play it now for the first time, you could say the same thing about Mario 64, trying to play that for the first time with the awkward cameras and stuff like that too. But Banjo-Kazooie did it pretty well. Mission Impossible. I loved the fact that the difficulty options were possible and impossible. But man, this game is not great. This game had so much potential to be amazing. Like, even if you just take what, GoldenEye was for the first-person mode and all that, I wanted to love this game. And it looks like, even looking at screenshots and stuff like that, I was like, ooh, I can't wait to play this. This is going to be a lot of fun. And I tried playing it, and man, it's rough. I don't know if this is because of the controls or what it is, but Mission Impossible for the Nintendo 64, I didn't care for it so much personally. Maybe you had better memories behind it. But it was an experience. WWF Warzone was such a letdown. I'm such a big wrestling fan. If you've watched this channel before, you know that. And so we finally get a WWF game on the Nintendo 64. Well, it came out for PlayStation as well. And in fact, a lot of the games that you're going to see on this list also came out maybe for PlayStation or Saturn, but never mind that. So we get WWF Warzone on the Nintendo 64. And the music, their theme songs, is MIDI. It's not even like captured audio. It's not like even like compressed MP3 and nothing like that. It was just like literally done through a MIDI track. Like somebody just kind of played it on a Casio keyboard. And their theme music is the first thing I'm going to talk about when talking about WWF Warzone. That's how important it is to me. The motion capture themselves, I think, was all done by the same guy who maybe have had a little bit of wrestling training, a little bit, but is everyone, and everyone kind of stands this kind of, that's their wrestling pose, their thing. Not motion capture, but they did capture face on that, which was hilarious because I remember hearing in an interview once where The Rock, Rocky Maivia is in this game, and he didn't even bother shaving because he's like, oh, it's not going to capture that, but it did. So like The Rock has like facial hair and kind of a mustache, and you're just like, oh, okay. So it controls terribly. Kind of like how Mortal Kombat had different moves and you had to learn their moves before you could really play the game. They wanted to do that with WWF Warzone as well. And I remember reading that in a magazine article once where they said like, oh, like that's the idea is you really learn your character and what moves they do and you really get good at that. And I was like, no, you need to just pick up the controller and play it, and the same buttons might do different moves, but you're going to do something. And this one was more of you have to like hit like down forward something to do a hip toss. It was dumb idea. I still played it a lot, but it was a dumb idea. There's a game called Recky's Egging Balls. Wait, that didn't come out right. Iggy's Wrecking Balls. Oh my goodness. Iggy's Wrecking Balls was a racing game where you play as different, like almost like, remember Mad Balls back in the 80s? You kind of play as something like that. Multiplayer, you have to go through the track, and you can also like go up to different platforms, and it was like that 2.5D they called it, kind of, where you can like, it's 2D, but in a 3D universe, so it still kind of rotates a little bit. It's actually not a terrible game. Probably better as a multiplayer. Gex 64. Now, I wish Gex 64 came out in 1997. I wish it came out a year prior, because we really could have used another great 3D platformer like this. I think it's a really great game. I've never been the biggest Gex fan. I would always play them, but they've always been like okay, yeah, sure, like whatever. As far as like the 3D platformers go, I think it's all right. It's actually pretty decent. So Gex 64 comes out in 1998. Bomberman Hero. I've always been a huge fan of the Bomberman games. I mean, I literally have the Bomberman tattoo. Might have to turn that upside down to see it, but still. This one, not like a traditional Bomberman. This one turns Bomberman, again, into a 3D platformer. So now it's a 3D platformer, but you play as Bomberman, and I'm okay with that. I like the fact that most of the Bomberman games also feature just Bomberman. Like, please include that too. But nice to have the other stories. Like, hey, now we're actually going to do this too. The fact that you can have Bomberman as a 3D platformer, tossing bombs and all that. What a fun idea. Another sports game on the list, NFL Blitz, was that awesome arcade game coming to the Nintendo 64. It was the new Tecmo Bowl. You didn't need to know about football. You didn't need to know who the teams were, anything like that. But you knew that you could have a fun time if you just pick up the controller and play it. And again, going back to WWF Warzone, that's the best idea for a game, is just the pick up a controller and play it. You'll figure it out. NFL Blitz did just that. Cruisin' World came out in 1998. Cruisin' USA, fantastic racing game. Cruisin' World, more the same. As successful as Cruisin' USA was, why wouldn't you have Cruisin' World? Deadly Arts came out. Now, this was from Konami, I believe. And Deadly Arts was a pretty decent 3D fighting game. A lot of the 3D fighting games kind of play the same. So some of my nostalgic memory kind of flows together. I remember like when you do get a victory in Deadly Arts, it does the instant replay with shadows and it's like a black background and stuff like that, which I thought was kind of cool. But a pretty decent 3D fighting game. I remember at least renting it. Flying Dragon came out as well. It looks 3D, it plays more like a 2D game. What was that Culture Brain series? That was like Flying Warriors, Flying Dragon. I mean, there's a bunch of them on the NES. Ultimate Flying Warriors? Was that? I don't remember. I think it was along those lines, and then he turned it into like a fighting game, and it was okay. Body Harvest was a game I remember reading about earlier, and couldn't wait to play. The idea that you could just like, run into any vehicle and then use that vehicle to defeat the enemies that are coming down, which are like giant bugs and stuff like that. I loved that idea. Boasting like so many different vehicles that you could just like, hop out of one vehicle and hop into the next vehicle and use that for your new weapon and stuff like that. What a fun idea with Body Harvest. And that's the kind of game I was usually looking out for on the Nintendo 64. Space Station Silicon Valley was a game you could tell that the creators of this game just had fun. They just had fun making this game. This would be like we have to make this game for the boss, for the corporate. We have to make whatever sponsored game to appease our corporate lenders. But then for fun, we're going to make this game called Space Station Silicon Valley. And you can see the fun in that game too, with the writing, just with the comedy. You play as like a dog in a way that has like this whatever microchip attached to it. and then you can go from there. And it's different little things in each stage. It's like, like herding the sheep and stuff like that too. It's a fun, silly game. WCW NWO Revenge may be the best wrestling game on the Nintendo 64, through my nostalgia glasses too. WrestleMania 2000 is fantastic. WWF No Mercy, amazing. But as far as the US released games, I probably played WCW NWO Revenge more than those other wrestling games as well. I played the holy bejesus out of this game. And not just because there's a guy named Riggs in it. My buddy, Scotty Riggs, eye patch and everything. This game blew my mind. This is the way a wrestling game should be. And I loved it. F-Zero X, we finally get an F-Zero game. Now, I'm not as married to the F-Zero series as most people are. However, F-Zero X was a great racing game. I liked the fact that it was not just, on a track that just moves around like this. This is my track, by the way. But it can also like curl up and go over, and there's like tubes that you can go around, and not just tubes to drive on the inside, but then also tunnels and tubes. And great game. Fantastic game. As far as like the futuristic racing games, they did it very well. There's a couple of games I might like you a little bit more, and one of them's coming up later on this list, but F-Zero X was definitely worth checking out. We had Wipeout 64, another futuristic racing game, and this is around the time when I was like, wait a minute, you can't have a PlayStation game on the Nintendo 64. Well, it turns out, yeah, you can, because it wasn't made by Sony, the different company made the game. You can do whatever they want with it. I was like, wait a minute. Which is fine by me because, I mean, as much as I loved the PlayStation version, I was a big fan of Wipeout 64, so happy to see it on here too. Another futuristic racing game, this time with, like, missiles and shields and other stuff that you can use to your advantage. Dual Heroes may be the worst fighting game on the Nintendo 64. Maybe. It looks like it's going to be cool, because it looks like it's going to be like Power Rangers or something. And then you play the game, and it's like it tries to be a Virtua Fighter, but not really, and there's the ring out, and the characters... it was worth a shot. Knife Edge is a game that not a lot of people talk about. It is an on-rail shooter for the Nintendo 64. You play as a helicopter kind of going through canyons and whatever you're going through. But you more control your target than you do like your actual helicopter. So, pretty cool idea for a Nintendo 64 game, Knife Edge. I think it's kind of a hidden gem. I kind of like this game, and I don't hear anybody talking about it. Rush 2 comes out for the 64, and this was okay. This was fun racing game. I liked that the vehicles took damage as you're hitting walls and other people are crashing into you. So you're actually starting to take some damage on your vehicle in a game like Rush 2. And it was a fine racing game. And again, these aren't really reviews, like full-on reviews of each game I'm talking about. I know there's like other modes and stuff like that too, and Rush 2 especially has some very cool features. But I thought it was pretty good. Twisted Edge Extreme Snowboarding. This is the one I liked. Most people liked the 1080. I like the Twisted Edge. I think it's because I felt like I could land the tricks better. I like the game I suck less at. How about that? So with a game like Twisted Edge, you more hold the button to do the moves, and then you let go, and then you're back into placement and everything. For the most part, anyway. But again, can you believe it? 3 snowboarding games all in the same year. Again, for some reason, it was just during a time when snowboarding games were in. And hey, you know what? If they're making money, no reason why not. Did you play Glover? Well, I think we all at least rented it, because it's like, well, it's a 3D platformer, gotta love that. I have a love-hate relationship with Glover. First of all, it should have been like Hamburger Helper, right? Wouldn't that be cool if they made a Hamburger Helper game? You're a Glover and you have a ball, and the ball can turn into different, like a bowling ball, or it can turn into like a pool cue, or whatever, you know, the other stuff that can turn into. It was another 3D platformer, and it starred a glove. Sure. Finally, later in the year, we get Zelda Ocarina of Time, and this one, I think, blew a lot of minds for the time, because I loved the Legend of Zelda series, and now Zelda's in 3D, and at the time, to me, it was like the perfect game. I was just like, I had everything I love about Legend of Zelda, has it in 3D, because there's a while there where I was trying to wrap my brain around when we started getting into, like, you know, 3D capabilities. I was like, how could you even do a Legend of Zelda game in proper 3D when you need to have, you know, where to bomb and where the doors are and everything? You can just look around everywhere, and it's like, yeah, it turns out you can, and it's amazing. And I'm here to tell you, the water temple is actually kind of a fun temple. Come on now. I mean, yes, it's difficult. They're all difficult. I like the water temple. It's not the worst one to me. I think the desert one was one of my worst ones, but never mind about all that. It's probably been about 15, maybe even 20 years since I've last played all the way through Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. Maybe it's time I go through it again. Top Gear Overdrive, another great racing game for the Nintendo 64. This one's from the Top Gear series, so you know you're getting quality. Top Gear, for me, just seemed smoother. You know, sometimes like the racing games are too fast. You know, it's like F-Zero, or, you know, the other ones like the Rush and the Cruising and all that. But this one just seemed smooth. To me, personally. Now, if I do them all comparatively, back to back, however many racing games there are, it probably acts about the same. But I just remember the Top Gear games just seemed that much better. You know what game no one ever talks about? Myro's Astro Lanes. Did you ever play this one? It was like the futuristic bowling game, but like you're bowling on different planets, so there's like volcanoes and stuff in the background, and you have like your bowling ball upgrades that as it's rolling down the aisle, then you can like make it get really big, or like shoot it like a rocket, or then all of a sudden there's 3 of them. It reminded me a bit on, remember like Baseball Simulator 1000, where you could like throw like 3 balls at the same time, or have your bat catch on fire, so if you hit it, it goes like way out somewhere. It reminded me a little bit if this was like Bowling Simulator 1000. You know what's funny? The bowling games is an underrated genre of video games, because the bowling games are usually pretty decent. I mean, you can usually at least play a bowling game for a little while. And Milo's Astro Lanes was fun enough, and I had that extra gimmick to make it be like, oh, okay, this is actually kind of fun. We'll see what happens next. Just talking about it makes me want to play it again. I'll play it after I'm done filming. Nightmare Creatures comes out on the 64. Now, I played Nightmare Creatures primarily on the PlayStation 1. However, it plays actually pretty well on the Nintendo 64 as well. It's just dark and grimy. You just have to fight off the monsters. I know I'm not really selling the game right now. but it actually played pretty decently, and it was kind of cool. And it was for me, with a game like Nightmare Creatures, a little bit like a Resident Evil or Silent Hill, not in gameplay style, but I want to keep playing it because I want to see what other crazy creatures are going to come out. I want to see what other twisted monstrosities are going to walk around the corner. And I always look forward to that creativity to it. So, Nightmare Creatures on the 64, it's actually pretty decent. We have Scars, S-C-A-R-S. This game is another futuristic racing game with weapon upgrades and things like that, where you play, but it's not just cars. You're playing as like animals on wheels. You're playing as like robotic animals. What does SCARS stand for? I'm sure it's like SCARS. Supercar Animal Robot Symphony. I have no idea what it stands for. I'll have to look it up. It was another racing game that you played as cars, but the gimmick was you have to be in different animals. It reminded me of like the late 80s. Hot Wheels would have like, it's a car, but it's like a python, or it's a car, but it's like a lion or something. Maybe they still exist. I don't know. I haven't looked at Hot Wheels in probably 30 years now. But Scars, I remember, was it was interesting enough, and it was worth a rental. Star Wars Rogue Squadron. Anytime you could have a Star Wars game where you're flying around in the Star Wars universe with the music playing, and you already know the ships and what they're capable of, that was always a good time for me. And Star Wars Rogue Squadron, I thought it was a lot of fun. I thought it was great. Turok 2, oh man, where do I start? I loved the first Turok game because I wanted a game like that where you're defending yourself from dinosaurs and the poachers or whoever the other guys were and stuff like that. And you're kind of limited in your abilities as far as like weapons to use until later you, of course, you start picking up guns and stuff. But to me, that was the fun. Like, you're in the jungle. That was Turok 1. You're in the jungle, and there's dinosaurs and, things like that. And then Turok 2 kind of made it into just another futuristic first-person shooter. Not bad, and it's a pretty decent game. I mean, but it didn't have to be Turok. It could have been anything. So I was a little upset by that, but it still played very well. I just wanted more of that, the love I had for the first Turok game. Even though the first Turok game, admittedly, isn't the best. But man, I had a lot of fun with it. And Turok 2, it was okay. Star Soldier Vanishing Earth. I've been waiting for a game like this on the Nintendo 64 for a while. Just give me the idea of those classic overhead shooters. Vertical shooter, horizontal shooter, whatever the case may be. Just give me one of those. It doesn't need to be 3D. Not every game needs to be in 3D just because you can do 3D. So they made 3D graphics, but still made it a vertical shooter, just like Star Soldier is supposed to be. So it's the Star Soldier game, which are always great, but it happens to be in 3D. And it's on the Nintendo 64. And it's just that same, you pick up your power, your upgrades, you shoot more bullets, whatever it is. Perfect. Yeah, show me more of that. I wish we had more of that on the 64. I mean, they had a ton of them on, like, for imports, for PlayStation 1, for Sega Saturn. They had a ton of them. We didn't get as many. We get South Park, finally. Now, South Park, man, it is hard to tell you, if you weren't from the time, how popular South Park was when it first came out. When it first came out, it was like the new thing that everyone was talking about. Everybody was quoting it. Everyone was talking about it. It was the thing that people were talking about. It was a huge phenomenon when South Park first came out. So we had to get the video game, right? And the video game, it's okay. The video game was fine. I remember I had fun with it. It was okay for a playthrough, but then mostly we used it for the multiplayer battle mode. Of course we did. We get Battle Tanks near the end of the year, and Battle Tanks, remember that game Battle City? I mean, it was an import for NES, or even like the tanks from Tron in a way, I suppose, where it's like you have your grid, you have your city, and then you're in a tank and you have to defeat the other tanks. That's basically Battle Tanks, along with the upgrades and stuff you can pick up. That's basically Battle Tanks. It was a pretty decent game to grab. Again, a great rental. And with how expensive Nintendo 64 games at the time, renting them was one thing I could afford. 1999 was a crazy year. It just felt like it hit different, didn't it? Let us talk about some amazing games, including a Tetris game that came out At the early 1999 for the Nintendo 64, it was Magical Tetris Challenge. With a name like that, it had to be Disney, and that's exactly what it was. It was a Tetris game that also had the Disney characters in it. And why wouldn't you? You take Tetris, the best puzzle game of all time. You take Disney, what most people consider the best animation company, whatever it was, especially for 1999. This is before all the mergers and all that too. I said mergers, nothing else. You know what? It was just another Tetris game for me at the time. I've gone back since recently and checked it out a little bit more because now, all these other Tetris things are coming out, including Tetris Forever from Digital Eclipse. I was really locked into that for a while. And I was just like, okay, so it's just, it's another way to play Tetris. And that's what's nice about Tetris. You can keep on reintroducing, and it's always going to be Tetris. We finally get a 3D Castlevania. And this I was excited for. Kind of. Like, just looking at it, I was like, it's not going to be the same. It's not going to be the same. I love Castlevania, and I love the NES ones. I'm from the day. I got some age. Trust me on this. I remember when Castlevania was the only Castlevania. Played in the arcade, and then came out on the NES. I was such a big fan of Castlevania, like that 2D, pixel-based, Symphony of the Night, Rondo Blood, but when it came out for Nintendo 64, I was like, well, of course they're going to do a 3D version. That's what Nintendo does. Let's take the Nintendo 64, what it's capable of, and take some of your favorite games, or favorite brands, favorite, whatevers, and make it into a 3D game. And here's the thing about Castlevania 64, I'll just call it. It's called something else, but I'll just call it Castlevania 64. It's not a terrible game. I don't know how Castlevania-y it is. You're some dude with a whip, that's not bad. It's from Konami, of course it is. It had a lot of potential, and for Nintendo 64, it was what it was. I would have been okay with a 2D Castlevania game, but because you're getting it on Nintendo 64, let's give you that 64 experience, and that's where Castlevania comes in. It was worth looking at, and it's funny, I like it more now than I did then. I think because at the time, again, 1999, I was so deep into playing like PlayStation 1 imports, all these great pixel-based games that were still existing, around everything else. And then here's the Nintendo 64, and it's like, I'm already done. But going back on it is actually kind of cool. Kind of. Penny Racers came out, again, going back to the imports, like, oh, cool, that's the Choro Q game actually came out in the US. Great. Penny Racers, a very easygoing kids-type racing game. Again, there are several racing games for the Nintendo 64, and this was, unfortunately, just another one. I thought it looked pretty smooth, it controlled pretty well. It was just kind of an easygoing game, if that makes sense. Oh, dear Lord, let me tell you about Mario Party. Now, we have all the Mario parties that have since been out. There's like 15 of them or something. There's like the 10 basic ones, and then there's like the side story ones, and the new one just came out a little bit ago. I love me some Mario Party, and when the first one came out for the Nintendo 64, I was like, it's a board game? I mean, whatever. I'll check it out, I guess. And I did. I remember this very clearly. I had South Park. South Park came out the year prior. It was okay, but I got my play out of it. And then back in the day, because this is how we traded games, I had the Usenet Newsgroups, buddy. And I found somebody who had Mario Party, and they didn't care for it. But they were looking for a copy of South Park for the Nintendo 64. Straight across trade. We didn't know each other. We just mailed each other our games, and it worked most of the time. And that was the game where my friends and I would stay up until the sun came up playing it. They talk about friendships being lost. I remember specifically one friend of mine who could never win. And then at the very, very end, last level, he had all the stars, had all the coins, more than all of us. And then he hit that, whatever that switch was or whatever, that transferred all of his coins and stars to someone else, and it was the funniest thing ever. He didn't speak for like 5 hours or something. Oh, sorry, Jeremy. Anyway, Mario Party, a lot of love for it. Came out in '99, and it's still one of my favorites. Love the Mario Party games. WCW Nitro came out. Now that the WWF, at the time, license is with the Aki engine and THQ, and those were like the really good wrestling games, right? Well, they can't just not make WCW wrestling games anymore, because WCW is still a very valid brand. So let's have someone else make these wrestling games. And Nitro, boy, it wasn't it. It moved too fast. I thought it looked pretty cool, but the camera was constantly spinning, so it was kind of hard to, like, you talk about ring awareness. Boy, I didn't have any kind of spatial awareness with how fast that ring was doing around. And it also just moved a little bit too fast action for my liking. Kind of cool to see, but man, it wasn't great. The good news is they did make a better WCW game later that I think came out later on this year too. We'll see if it pops up on this list. Foreshadowing. Snowboard Kids 2. I do like the Snowboard Kids games, and the second one came out. It could have been the first one, and if I put them back to back, I couldn't tell you which one was first, which one was second, without looking at the title screen. I liked them okay. Again, snowboarding games were still very popular, and this was a snowboarding game that also had some extra features you could use, some extra little power-ups and stuff like that too. So, very cool. I'm down. Vigilante 8. I was very happy to see this come out because I was such a huge fan of Twisted Metal. Loved me Twisted Metal for the PlayStation 1. Twisted Metal 2 was really good too, and 3 was okay. But Vigilante 8 kind of brought you back to Twisted Metal 1 and 2. So when you played Vigilante 8, you're like, oh, this is what I remember Twisted Metal being so good. It's not exactly Twisted Metal, but it does play a lot like it, enough for you to say, you know what, this is good enough for Twisted Metal on the 64. They made Vigilante 8 for other systems too, but cool to see it on the 64. Beetle Adventure Racing came out, another racing game. This one was heavily sponsored by Volkswagen, of course, because it's Beetle. It's the Volkswagen Beetle, and for some reason, for the longest time, the Volkswagen Beetle was the thing. It was the thing that you would see on the road. I've never driven in one. I've never even been in one. I've never driven one, and I've never even been in one. But it was kind of a thing, and was for a while, like until 2002 or so. Yeah, the Volkswagen Beetle was just, I mean, it was just its own thing, is all the best I could say. The Volkswagen Beetle, now that I think about it, to be extra 90s, the Volkswagen Beetle should have been transparent. So you could like back when, like, you know, the iMac and everything else would have the transparency, the Game Boy Colors, the Play It Loud series. Even the Nintendo 64 had the transparent plastic so you can see through it. They should have done something like that with the Volkswagen Beetle so you could like see the engine and stuff. But actually, it'd probably be a distraction. They should have done that. If anyone would have done it, they could have done that. Anyway, the game was fine. Micro Machines 64 Turbo came out in 1999. I thought it was pretty cool because it reminded me a lot of RC Pro-Am. So you get the tank controls, unfortunately, where left goes left, right goes right. It doesn't matter if you're up or down. Left goes left, right goes right. It does get used to because I played me a lot of RC Pro-Am. So it was nice to play it again because it was like, it kind of took me back to, playing RC Pro-Am again. It wasn't the best game ever. It certainly wasn't the best racing game ever. But again, another racing game that wasn't the same traditional 3D racing game. Lode Runner 3D didn't need to happen. It looked like, well, how could I even describe this? It was an interesting sort of game. Like, hey, let's find this old IP that at this point, people playing this game, they've probably never even heard of the original Lode Runner. Because Lode Runner, wasn't the biggest thing in the United States for so long. I mean, it was kind of a thing, in the 80s. And now here we are, late 90s, and here's Lode Runner 3D. It could have been better. It's another one of those that could have been better. They did try to put the little 3D spin to it. It still had the same idea where you could like disrupt blocks and everything, but it wasn't like one stage and grab all the money bags or the gold or whatever to move on to the next stage. This one was definitely more linear in a puzzle platformy way, but still with Lode Runner where you can make the blocks dissipate and then hopefully you can make them go away in such a place that you can continue and not get stuck. I don't know, it was a rental for me. So we get Rampage 2 now for the 64. Rampage 2 was interesting. I mean, it was just like, it was another Rampage World Tour type of game, but it featured new monsters. Was there anything different about it? I honestly can't remember. I just remember it playing exactly like the other Rampage World Tour game on the 64, but this time it had different monsters in it. So I was able to check it out, but I was like, okay, so it's still kind of the same though. You see Charlie's Blast Territory, again, another game that reminded me of Bomboozled. Was that the name of the game? For the Super Nintendo, it was like it was a near launch title for Super Nintendo where you had to like blow up the bombs a certain way so you were still standing on a platform without your platform being blown up by a bomb. And Charlie's Blast Territory reminded me of that. And I like puzzle games like that for a while, so it was fun to see for a little bit. Chameleon Twist 2, I liked the first one okay, and the second one I thought played even better. Chameleon Twist could have been another franchise that continued on and on and on. Was it Sunsoft? I think it was. It was a 3D platformer, but with the addition of having like the extendo tongue that you could use to grab walls to move yourself to the wall. You could also like stick out your tongue and use the analog to make the tongue lap around and grab all the enemies, and then you could, once you suck in the enemies, you can blast them back out, kind of like Yoshi in a way. Boy, they could have teamed up with Nintendo and had that game be a Yoshi game versus the Yoshi game we did get. But what are you gonna do? Chameleon Twist 2. Hey, I think it's pretty fun. Super Smash Bros. Came out. and I was excited for a while. I like it, but I'm not a fanatic on it. I'm not, you know, I hold my own just fine, and I thought it was a fun idea to have kind of this megaverse of all these Nintendo characters in a fighting game. But it wasn't the actual Nintendo characters, it was like them as toys. So that's how you can get away with like them beating each other up, because it's the toys beating each other up, not the actual characters. And I was like, okay, I get it, it's fine. Super Smash Brothers, I don't need to tell you more about that, but it all started in 1999. King Griffey Jr. Slugfest came out in 1999. Again, the baseball games are usually pretty good, and because it was King Griffey Jr., I wanted to check it out, and I liked how you had, again, that hitbox where, depending on if you're pitching or if you're batting, you can kind of see where the ball's going to be, and that way you can predict better if you're going to hit the ball or not, and let it sail away. I thought it was kind of cool. This was the change, though, because last year it was in the Kingdom, and that was when they blew up the Kingdom. Now they have Safeco Field. So Safeco Field is on this one. Was this the first game that featured Safeco Field? There may have been another baseball game before this, but man alive, yeah, kind of cool to see. It's like, okay, cool, they're actually keeping up. This is interesting. Star Wars Episode 1 Racer. Nowhere on the box does it say Pod Racer, but I think we all just called it Pod Racer. You know, Star Wars Pod Racer. No, it's Star Wars Episode 1 Racer. Great in the arcade, and on the Nintendo 64, it played very well. I liked it quite a bit. And man, 1999? I swore this game came out sooner than that. I swore this game came out like in 97 or 98, whenever the Star Wars movie came out. I swore it came out right around then, but I guess it came out in 1999. That's what a lot of people have said. It's like, well, the only reason they put the pod racer scene in that Star Wars Episode 1 was just to sell the video game. And I was just like, I'm cool with that, because whatever with the movie, I don't care about that. I thought the game was great. So, good news for me, I guess, right? Did you play Superman? Did you try, at least, to play Superman? Here's the truth about Superman. If the first stage wasn't flying through the rings, the game could have been maybe a little bit better. A little bit. Not much, but a little bit better. Because the first thing you do is you have to fly through the rings, and it does not give you much time. Once you figure out how to actually fly, you know, aim right in, and like you can't miss, like, what, 3 of them or something like that? If it was more than that, if it didn't just have that, if the first thing was, hey, fly over here and talk to this person, or it would be like, hey, here comes an enemy, make sure you punch him or use your whatever powers, it's fine. I have gotten as far as this. I should just play through it with a Game Genie or something. I've gotten past the first rings part where you have to fly through the rings, and then the very next thing is you have to do something else, and if you fail at something else, you have to fly through the rings again. And that's when I was like, nope, I'm good. I've never gone back since. So there's that. Yeah, Superman oftentimes shows up on a lot of lists for not just worst game on 64, but like, you know, worst game of all time. And I mean, there's an argument to be made there, I suppose. I've never played most of it, so maybe it's better. Bugs Life came out in 1999. Bugs Life, not a terrible game. Nice little platformer based on Bugs Life. Bugs Life was a movie I didn't really watch at the time. I may have played the game first, and then I watched the movie, and then I went back and played the game. It may have been how that happened. I don't know. I thought it was okay, though. It's another 3D platformer. It's another, you know, it's fine. Fighting Force 64 came out in 1999, Fighting Force 64. It was cool to see these 3D brawlers, these 3D beat-em-up style games. Loved me Die Hard Arcade, one of the best. It might be the best 3D side-scrolling beat-em-up with everything it can do. And then Fighting Force is okay, and man, it's slow. It just moves sluggish on this game, so I wish it could be better. For a while there, I remember, was it in magazines, or did maybe just, you know, some of my friends telling me, they're like, oh, no, this is Streets of Rage 3D, but they can't call it that. But it's totally Streets of Rage 3D, but it's like from the same, I was like, I don't know if any of that's true. But I was like, hey, it's good enough for me. Okay. Shadowgate 64 was another Shadowgate game that disappointed me, because I love NES Shadowgate, one of my favorites of all time. And every time they've tried to do another Shadowgate, it wasn't Shadowgate. They had Beyond Shadowgate for the Turbo CD, the Turbo Duo, like the Turbo Graphics CD, whatever that thing's called. And there have been other like Shadowgates, and then here's Shadowgate 64, and I mean, it's okay. It's, you know, again, that kind of puzzly, you know, look at this, use this on that. I get it, but I would rather just have that text style thing. Fortunately, they finally have one that just came out that is that old school style Shadowgate game, and I did a video on that not too long ago, just to show you like a little bit of the, you know, the opening sequence and all that. However, Shadowgate 64, it was cool to see. Again, wish it was more that classic style of Shadowgate. Got the Rugrats Scavenger Hunt. Have you seen this one? Rugrats was, at the time, was the flagship Nickelodeon show for years, all throughout the 90s, and then even into the early 2000s until SpongeBob took over. But for the longest time, pre-SpongeBob, it was Rugrats, Scavenger Hunt. It's all right. I mean, we already had Mario Party, and then Rugrats 60. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I could call it Rugrats 64. It's Rugrats Scavenger Hunt because there are multiple. There's a few of them, at least 2 of them. This one was more of a board game style game. So Rugrats board game. You're better off just playing Mario Party. This game, I have to literally read it. Starshot Space Circus Fever. Starshot Space Circus Fever. If any game screamed rent me at a video store, because ain't none of your friends had it, you could only play it by renting it. You couldn't borrow it from anyone else. You know what's funny? This game actually wasn't so bad. I remember checking it out. I was working at a video store at the time, so that helped. But I remember checking it out, and it was missing something. I don't know what it was missing. But I thought it had a lot of potential for being another 3D platformer on the Nintendo 64, of which there were several. It was okay. A lot of the games were okay. I'm reading this off of Wikipedia now. One of the few games on Nintendo 64 to feature the 16:9 widescreen. I didn't even know that. So, I mean, that's from Wikipedia, so take it for what it's worth. Maybe that'll be another video. Find out all the games that are the 16:9. There you go. Quake 2 came out, another Quake game. It's more Quake. More Quake for your... Try to come up with a rhyme. Don't worry about it. Quake 2. This one did play better, I thought. Again, I wasn't the biggest Quake fan, but it was cool to see. Cool that they had one. Mario Golf came out for the Nintendo 64, and this, I don't know if this was the first one that started it, but then you have the Mario Sports series, like Mario Golf, Mario Tennis. Where's my Mario Dodgeball? That's what I really want, right? We don't need Mario Tennis, Mario Golf, Mario Soccer, Mario whatever. Mario Golf did feature a character named Plum. You had Peach, and then there's Plum. Why can't we get Plum to, like, show up more often in these games? Daisy's great. We all love Daisy. Peach, cool. Daisy, the best. Let's make Plum a character in other games that aren't just golf games. So now we have the new Tetris. And here's another Tetris game. Oh my goodness. The new Tetris, is it that new? Well, I mean, there's an idea to it that makes it new. A new gameplay style that kind of stuck with this one as far as I know. It's just another Tetris game. And again, that's nothing wrong with that. I love the Tetris game, so fine. Revolt came out for the 64 in 1999, another the racing game, but this one's a racing game where you are an RC car. So you're actually racing as an RC car versus the other RC cars in a smaller world, obviously, because you're an RC car. So that was kind of fun. So if you're a huge RC fan, Revolt, that would have been the one to get for the 64, especially in 1999 when it was released. Duke Nukem 0 Hour came out, and this is weird. This is like, because Duke Nukem is supposed to be first-person view, catchphrases galore. There are catchphrases in this. But this one's like behind the shoulder. This one's like that siphon filter view, that kind of like Uncharted view. I mean, like, it would be like if they had Doom, and then you like look over the guy's shoulder, or Halo in this case, and look over the guy's shoulder, something like that. Yeah, but it's like no, just, you know, give me that first-person perspective. That's what I'm used to with my Duke Nukem games. But maybe they're trying something new, and maybe because that was the way that new games were going, was doing this kind of over-the-shoulder thing. So, more power to them. Gauntlet Legends came out. I love the fact that Midway was doing these games, because, you know, they had the Rampage, and now Gauntlet Legends. Bring back Gauntlet. And it's perfect for the 64. 4 players simultaneous. You can choose your characters, choose your colors. It moves pretty slow, because it's on the 64, probably. But man, what a great idea. And what a great way to bring back Gauntlet with Gauntlet Legends. I mean, I was a huge fan of Gauntlet back in the day, and then to see it come out, because like, we could have had Gauntlet for the Super Nintendo, if you think about it. That would have been fun. It would have been great. But, you know, save it for the 64, now with the 3D, but still with the overhead view for Gauntlet Legends, and it's still a fun one. Fun to see in the arcade, too. Hybrid Heaven. This was the closest to Metal Gear Solid, without being Metal Gear Solid, we were going to get on the Nintendo 64. So Hybrid Heaven, that was the one you had to more recommend to other people, because you'd see it along with everything else on the shelf. People kept asking, hey, where's, you know, when's Metal Gear Solid coming to the Nintendo 64? And it's like, well, it's not. But you got Hybrid Heaven. So Hybrid Heaven, we got Metal Gear Solid at home. That's Hybrid Heaven, and it's actually a pretty cool game. Shadow Man as well. Shadow Man was interesting enough, just because you play as Shadow Man. And it was kind of during a time when games like that, I harken back to like Nightmare Creatures, for instance, where, you know, it was cool to see games like this and see what they could do. They were still kind of experimenting and still kind of, you know, testing the waters to see what they could do for, you know, kind of a, I don't want to say story driven, because there's still just a bunch of action too. But Shadow Man seemed to stand out a little bit more, I thought. So now we have WWF Attitude. WWF Attitude comes out. We had Warzone the last year, and that wasn't great. And then WWF Attitude comes out, and it's kind of more of the same. Fortunately, the music was changed. Over on WWF Warzone, the music was like MIDI-based, and this one they actually kind of captured the actual song. It had a far more robust Create a Wrestler feature. It had more songs, it had more things you could use, and it played better than the other one, but it still wasn't exactly what you're looking for in a wrestling game. But WWF Attitude, I thought, was a better game than Warzone for sure. But the better wrestling games for WWF are coming out soon. Watch out. Hot Wheels Turbo Racing, multiple levels, multiple designs. Like when you're racing, like with Hot Wheels, the track can split off into different sections, and you have to kind of choose which section you want to go. I thought that was pretty cool. They would have to do something like that with Hot Wheels, and why not do that for a Hot Wheels racing game? Very cool. Goemon's Great Adventures. Now this one is like your Mystic Ninja 64 2. It's the second one that came out. I wish this was the first one that came out, because when you do the levels, like there's a little bit of a 3D element and you're talking to some people, but when you actually play the game, like the actual action part of the game, the actual video game part of the video game, you know what I mean? Like the actual reason that you actually wanted to play the game, then it does that 2D style that I absolutely love. It was a little bit more like that Super Nintendo version when you, go through the town or whatever, and then you actually play the platformy part. That was this one, and that's why this one's awesome. Road Rash 64, I do love the Road Rash games. Cool to see it on the Nintendo 64. It just looks like a Nintendo 64 version of Road Rash. I mean, which is supposed to be that, and that's exactly what it is. Road Rash, great. Motorcycle, kicking over the other people, gives you that option. This one, it looks like a Nintendo 64 version of Road Rash, and that's exactly what you're looking for. You can still bike down the road and kick people off, or whip them off, or chain them up, whatever the case is. I gotta love it. So we get 2 WCW games in 1999, and then we get WCW Mayhem. This is the second one that came out for this year. WCW Mayhem is actually a pretty decent game. It's the better of the bunch. Still not perfect, but it does control better, it does play better, it has a great roster, I think, and for its time, we're just like, well, I mean, we don't have the Aki engine anymore, and this one, Nitro wasn't it, and WCW Thunder was definitely not it. That was kind of the sequel to Nitro in a way. They went with a different route with WCW Mayhem, and this one did play a little bit better than the other one. So of all the ones to get, WCW Mayhem is probably the best non-WCW NWO Revenge and World Tour best WCW game we had on the 64. Army Men Sarge's Heroes was a game, again, I worked at a video store in 1999, and for some reason the Army Men game for the 64 was a game that we had trouble keeping on shelves, because as soon as it came in, it got rented right back out. Man, people love this game. Usually a younger demographic. And I was grown in 1999, in my earliest 20s. During this time, it was like more like the 10-year-olds would want to come in and rent that game, which is fine, because it was, again, you play as Army Men. And it was actually a pretty fun game, too. I checked it out once or twice. Gex 3, another Gex game. Why wouldn't you have another Gex game? And this one's great, too. That's all I'll say. Destruction Derby 64. Now, again, it was one of those things where it's like, you can't have Destruction Derby on the 64. It's a PlayStation game. Well, you can, and they did. And although this one probably, I think, more features like the racing, you have to find the actual, like, the demolition derby part of it, which is the best part. It's in the junkyard on the 64, I believe. Because that's the best part of the game. I don't care about racing around with a bunch of people and crash damage and all that. I want to be in the pit, destroying other cars with my car. You gotta back into them. Don't just head on full force. Your engine's in the front of the car. Why would you ram someone with that? No, back up into these other cars if you can. Fortunately, there's like the backup mode and the backup camera, so not too hard, but still, that's the best part, of course. Jet Force Gemini was a fantastic game. I did like Jet Force Gemini. Did I ever beat it? I don't think I ever did. That's not the one I gotta go through. The more I think about Nintendo 64 games, the more I think I've rented or checked out a bunch of them, but didn't really own a lot of them, so I never played them long enough to actually like play all the way through them. And I think Jet Force Gemini was another one of those that was absolutely in that category where it's like, man, what a fun game. Why didn't I play it longer? I don't know. I was busy doing all this other stuff too. But Jet Force Gemini, that was one that's, I think, worth checking out for sure. We had Knockout Kings 2000. Here's what I love about Knockout Kings 2000. You can't do a better boxing game than Punch-Out. Whether it be Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, Standard Punch-Out, the Arcade Punch-Out, Super Punch-Out. That is the only way you can do a boxing game any justice. But Knockout Kings was fantastic. And it was so refreshing to finally have a decent boxing game that wasn't just hit them before they hit you. And hopefully you block when they throw a punch that you didn't see coming. Or, you know, something like that. It actually played very well. So great to see this. And on the 64, it played pretty well too. Oh boy, we had Earthworm Jim 3D. Now, I'm a big fan of Earthworm Jim. Love the first two for the Super Nintendo. The first one, actually, on Sega CD is my ultimate version. But the Earthworm Jim 3D, it was another attempt to make a 3D game that didn't need to be 3D. And once you play it, you'll see why. Paperboy came out for the Nintendo 64, and that was like, oh yeah, Paperboy. I forgot about Paperboy. Had a couple of them on the NES, had one of them on the Super Nintendo, I think. I think Paperboy 2 was it Paperboy 2 on Super Nintendo? Because it was on NES also. And now we have a 3D version of Paperboy. Took a little different approach, a little different angle. Not angle, like literal angle, but just a different approach to the Paperboy game, where like when you throw the paper, you can kind of aim it a little bit, which I thought was fantastic because I could never quite get the angle right when I play standard Paperboy, like on the NES or in the arcade or anything. But oh, what a great idea. Now, it has a lot of potential, is what I'll say. It's not the best ever Paperboy game that anybody could possibly imagine, and I wouldn't mind if Paperboy came back today, but I liked the fact that you could kind of aim it a little bit. That did make it a little bit easier for me. Rayman 2, man, of all the Marios and the Sonics and all that, Rayman has consistently been an excellent series throughout ever since I first played it. The first time I played it was on PlayStation 1. And I was like, oh, this is a fun cartoony platformer game. Okay, cool. I like the Rayman games. Ever since then, and including to today, the Rayman games have been fantastic. Now, Rayman on the 64, of course, is a 3D platformer, and it plays very well as a 3D platformer. I prefer the 2D pixel-based and all that, of course I do, but this one plays very, very well. We have Ready to Rumble Boxing. Now, Knockout Kings 2000, that's a little bit more an actual boxing game, you know what I mean? Ready to Rumble Boxing is that Midway style, arcade, funny, comedy, character, over-the-top boxing game. That was also pretty cool. It was pretty decent to check out, because around this point, I was already kind of done with fighting games, not really done with fighting games, but I was like, I'm okay. Let me find a new genre to just really sink my teeth into. So why not, instead of having a fighting game, have a boxing game? Okay. And Ready to Rumble was actually pretty cool. I liked seeing it. Wouldn't mind if that one made a comeback too. Resident Evil 2. We finally get a Resident Evil game on the Nintendo 64. And again, it plays extremely well for a 64 game. I didn't think it would when I first saw it. Now, I played it on PlayStation 1. That was my way I played Resident Evil 2. But when I saw it on the 64, I didn't really get into it because I already have it on PlayStation. Why would I play it on 64? But when I finally did look at it just to kind of compare, I was like, oh, they actually did it pretty well. So, cool. Toy Story 2. Now, a lot of people grew up with Toy Story 2 being their 3D platformer. Like, that's their game, is Toy Story 2. That's their memory, that's their nostalgia. Like, for me, maybe more like a Mario 64, you know, even something earlier than that. But there's a lot of people who are just like, oh man, I played so much Toy Story 2. I was like, Toy Story 2? Well, why wouldn't they? That would be the safe game that parents would get their kids at the time, during a time of like Mortal Kombat and stuff like that. So here's this great game from Disney, great movie, put it on a game system, and you know what's funny? It's actually really good. If you ever checked out Toy Story 2, check it out. It's really good. WWF WrestleMania 2000. I was so excited for this. So I loved WCW NWO Revenge, and I liked World Tour as well. So now we get WrestleMania 2000, which is that same Aki engine. So now it's like you take that from WCW, like Revenge, for instance, remove the WCW of it, put the WWF in it. It wasn't called WWE yet. I was more into WWE than WCW. I watched WCW also, but I was more into WWE. I'm from the Pacific Northwest, not that that matters, but I know there's a lot of people in the South love them some WCW. So, and I like again, I watched WCW for like the cruiserweights and stuff. So then you take WWF and all the wonderful things that was going on with it. The Rock, Steve Austin, Chris Jericho was in this one, Undertaker. I mean, it was like an all-star lineup of the time as it was getting into it was already in the Attitude Era. And then the newer wrestlers were just showing up too. Fantastic. Loved me some WWF WrestleMania 2000, and it was a good tease of what's to come when No Mercy came out. But we got this game in the meantime. Donkey Kong 64, now we have a Donkey Kong game in 3D, and man, what a great idea for a game. I liked it quite a bit. The cameras would always get in the way, but it's also a Nintendo 64 game, so I think most games we were used to the cameras getting in the way. So I like the fact that it was like, you know, like yellow, and you had to use the jumper pack, or like the expansion pack? I keep on calling it the jumper pack. And that controller, that banana controller, I never had one, but boy, it looked interesting. Turok Rage Wars came out. This is not Turok 3. This is its own version of Turok. And this was Turok getting involved with the arena fighters. So you had your GoldenEye, of course, but now you have like your Quake. This was that. This was another, I mean, it was built as a multiplayer kind of fighting, like first-person shooter with Turok. So Turok Rage Wars, cool. Namco Museum 64. Here's one of many with all the Namco. They're like, hey, we can just keep on rehashing, making these compilation collections, and people keep buying them. Apparently it works. See if I can remember without looking at the page. Pac-Man, Miss Pac-Man, Galaxian, Galaga, Dig Dug. It wasn't Rally X. What was it? All right. Pole Position. That's right. Pole Position. Wow. Okay. That was cool. And then Space Invaders was also pretty cool. Let's bring back Space Invaders. Good Lord. Okay. So Space Invaders on the Nintendo 64. It's actually kind of a cool version of Space Invaders. It's not the old-fashioned 1978. When did that game come out? 79? Whatever it was. It's not that one. It's like, hey, let's make a newer kind of Space Invaders. And it was kind of cool to see. It looks like it would play... It's funny. It was on the Nintendo 64 back in 1999. It looks like if they would have made Space Invaders for like the new Atari system or something, you know, like by today's standards, or like an app or something like that. Even for the 64 back in 99, it would look like if it came out today as, you know, who knows, something like that. Xena Warrior Princess. Here's the thing. I don't think I ever played this game, but man, you could not deny how popular Xena Warrior Princess was. Xena was everywhere. It was that thing that everyone was talking about, whether they were kind of like joking about it, making fun of it, referencing it. It was the thing. It was always on, it seemed like, and people were just, I remember some of my family members would like watch it regularly, my sisters, and it was just the thing. Xena Warrior Princess. But it came out for the Nintendo 64, and I'm sure I've looked at it at least a little bit, but I couldn't tell you anything about it off the top of my head. But I still wanted to talk about the fact that there was a Xena game on the 64. We also had another 3D Castlevania game. This is Castlevania Legacy of Darkness. 2 Castlevania games for the Nintendo 64 in the same year. It's almost too soon. Like, give it a year. Let it breathe. And here we have 2 of them. But it's funny because we also had 2 WCW games and 2 WWF games. So why not? Again, as popular as South Park was, we have another South Park game. This one is South Park Chef's Love Shack. It played like a game show. There's a great game. It was on MTV. They had it on the NES called Remote Control. It plays a lot like Remote Control. You choose the category, multiple choice. It was kind of an easier game, you know, just for fun. It was like a quiz game, but it's still using the South Park characters. So why not make some money off that? Same with Monopoly. You know what? The board games are actually pretty decent video games. And I always liked them because with the board games, you didn't need to collect your other friends together. And you also, especially with a game like Monopoly, you wouldn't feel bad about just quitting halfway through. Because like sometimes like everyone else gets involved and then you're just kind of sitting there in the corner, like playing this board game. You're just like, man, I'd rather be doing literally anything else right now. But you keep playing it because your friends are playing it and they're really having a good time. Yeah, so playing these board games, and I'm sure you can play a multiplayer too, but it's like, yeah, even playing it by yourself, you're fine. At the end of the year, we get Harvest Moon 64. Here's the best part about Harvest Moon 64. It may be the cheapest Harvest Moon game there is. You're looking for the Super Nintendo version, that one's going to cost you a premium. You know, actually, maybe the DS one might be something. I don't know. And there are other Harvest Moon games, but they had Harvest Moon on the Nintendo 64 before we had Stardew Valley. We had a game like Harvest Moon 64, which, again, if you know both of those games, they're not a whole lot similar, but it was like that kind of just cozy style farm RPG-ish game that someone could just gravitate towards and play it kind of in their own way. And how I played it was I took it out and I popped in WWF WrestleMania 2000. That's how I played the game. Never mind about all that. Checking out the Nintendo 64 games that came out in the year 2000. Super Bowling 64. Again, the bowling games are an underrated genre of video games. The bowling games are usually pretty playable and also oftentimes pretty decent. Now with Super Bowling 64, you can choose from a few different characters even, as well as a few different lanes that you can unlock later as well. That's right, no DLC in this 64 game. You have to unlock a them by virtue of playing the game. Remember that? Remember those days? Oh, weren't they great? I like it because you have to aim twice. Like, you kind of aim about where you want to throw, and then you have to aim where you're going to stand. And then with your power meter and all that, you toss the ball down the lane. It's bowling at the end of the day. And it plays really well. And there's also like other versions too, like you can play golf. It's not really golf, but it's like golf scoring in a way, but you're still bowling, if that makes sense. Anyway, Super Bowling 64, if you haven't checked it out, you're just like, bowling game, whatever. You know, I'm too busy playing, you know, the other cool games that came out for the 64. It's actually pretty fun. Mario Party 2 comes out near the beginning of the year. Continuing with Mario Party 1, this one just basically gives you new maps to choose from. New gameplay, new battlefields? New boards, I suppose you could call them. This one's kind of fun because depending on the level you're on, you'll have a different costume, which is like, okay, that's kind of cute. I guess we can do that. Other than that, it's just more Mario Party. You gotta love it. Vigilante 8 Second Offense comes out. I don't know why I'm not as tied to Vigilante 8 as I am Twisted Metal, because I was all about Twisted Metal when it first came out for the PlayStation 1. I was all about Twisted Metal, played the holy bejesus out of it, and then I played Twisted Metal 2 a ton. Twisted Metal 3 comes out, I'm like, I wasn't as attached to it, but Vigilante 8 filled that void. As if, and maybe it happened, I don't know. I did, again, as always, if you know me and my videos, I do zero research, it's all nostalgic memory. It's like the team from the original Twisted Metal left and then made Vigilante 8. Is that pretty close to the truth? So then when Vigilante 8 Second Defense comes out, where you can play as like a motorcycle with a sidecar, which I loved the storyline that it's like the all-star team or whatever, like not quite like the Globetrotters, but they're like Evel Knievel, but not real, I don't know. Cool story. You can play as like a bus in this one. It's more of that Twisted Metal style of game, but Vigilante 8 Second Defense. If you loved Twisted Metal and you're like, I missed that, but you never played this one, this is like old school Twisted Metal, man. You're gonna love it. Ridge Racer 64. We get Ridge Racer 64. Now, Ridge Racer for the PlayStation 1 came out 5 years prior, and now we get Ridge Racer for the 64. And again, I was still stuck in that Ridge Racer on 64, but Ridge Racer is a PlayStation game. Well, no, it's from Namco, and Namco can make games for anyone they want. And hey, you know what? If you didn't have a PlayStation, but your parents got you the 64, well, now you can play Ridge Racer 64, and it actually plays pretty well on the 64. Tarzan comes out. It is your easy, side-scrolling, they called it 2.5D. It's a 2D game, but because it's using polygons, you can still have a little bit of depth with it. Made for kids, Disney game with Tarzan. You got the MIDI Phil Collins music in the background. Yeah, you know. ECW comes out, Extreme Championship Wrestling. I was a huge ECW fan, especially in the year 2000. Now, we have the WWE games, or WWF at the time, with the Aki engine, which is what you want. So now the team behind the other, like the WWF Raw is War and the Attitude game that were terrible, now they're making ECW games. Well, we still had to play it, we still had to look at it because, oh my god, it's ECW. ECW is popular enough to get its own video game now, because ECW was like pretty underground without it being too underground, you know what I mean? And it's like, oh, it actually has a video game? Cool, let's support it. And then you get it and it's like, it's not great. But at least they had one. South Park Rally was a game that came out. Another South Park game. Still gotta love the South Park games. This one is very Mario Kart-esque, where you can just drive around the tracks. Now this one's kind of nice because it has multiple paths you can take that's visible on the map, which that's not so bad. And starts off with some basic characters. You can unlock a lot of characters later on too, including Jesus. This may be the first game where Jesus is a playable character in a racing game, maybe? Quite literally, Jesus take the wheel. It's another Mario Kart game. You can pick up items and stuff like that. It's all right. It was kind of fun. Hydro Thunder is a racing game. Again, 64 loves their racing games, and Hydro Thunder is the hydroplane speedboat racing game. And I come from Washington State. I'm on the east side of Washington, where near Tri-Cities. I used to live in Tri-Cities for a couple years. The Water Follies, huge event. Huge event is the Water Follies. We have all these hydros on the Columbia River, speedboats and all the hydroplanes and all that too. Very, very big thing for that area. So it was cool to see this as a video game. And the video game didn't have that same feel, unfortunately, but at least it's something. It's give it another racing game, but hey, now you're a boat. Cool. Pokemon Stadium came out, and this was the Pokemon game that I could get behind. I knew nothing about Pokemon outside of a few of them, the kind of like the main characters that you would see in toys and cartoons and stuff like that. And so now here's a game that's a battle game, but you're actually playing as the Pokemon in a battle form and not going around collecting and doing all that stuff. So you can actually challenge your friends in this Pokemon game versus each other, which I thought was pretty fun for the time. So even though I knew nothing about Pokemon, I wasn't like into Pokemon even at all, I could still get behind this game. So very cool that they would have this. Tony Hawk Pro Skater finally comes out for the Nintendo 64, and good thing. It actually plays very well. I played it mostly on other platforms, but the fact that we have Tony Hawk Pro Skater, which again plays very well on the Nintendo 64, you gotta love it. Came out in 2000, I love that. We have Battlezone, Rise of the Black Dogs. Now Battlezone, when I saw that, I was like, Battlezone like the old arcade game Battlezone? Well, kind of. You play as a tank, and you're doing tank-type things in Rise of the Black Dogs, where you go around in your tank and you shoot the other tanks and shoot down radars and stuff like that, too. The controls are not great, but then I had to remember that this is on a Nintendo 64, so the controls are already not going to be great. And then I double remembered that Battlezone in the arcade, the controls were not great. Actually, the controls were very good in the arcade. It made sense, where you have it's dual stick, and you push them both to go up, but you push like one this way and one that way so the tank to turn around and stuff like that. So it's, you know, one controls one side of the tank, one controls the other side of the tank. This one doesn't quite play like that. It's one of those games where the C button moves you, and then your analog is your like aiming the target and stuff like that. Confusing at first. You did get used to it after playing the Nintendo 64 for a while. It's a little rough to go back to now, though. Excitebike 64 comes out, and finally, because I was waiting for an Excitebike game for the Super Nintendo forever, and then we never even got a sequel to Excitebike on the NES, which is too bad. So we finally get Excitebike 64, and it's not bad. And I was like, okay, well, at this point, sure, it's going to be a 64 game behind the back, racing around the tracks. I get it. And it actually controls pretty well. You can, put your foot out to drag and, stop and drag to, flip around and stuff like that. But the fun of this game, and my best memory behind this game, is they had this on display at our local Software Etc. in our Yakima Mall, and they had Excitebike 64. Nobody cared. They went straight to the special tracks, because in Excitebike 64, once you once you do the tutorial stage, then it unlocks. You can just play Excitebike, the NES version, on the 64 cart. So my fun of this game is like, oh cool, here's that one game, but then people at Software Etc. were all playing the old school NES version of Excitebike, on the display case. So I was like, that was kind of eye-opening for me to think like, okay, cool, I'm not the only one who's really still into all these retro games, even though there's newer games. The game itself, though, it's actually pretty decent. Perfect Dark comes out. For some reason, I thought it came out earlier than this. But man, Perfect Dark was the game that GoldenEye should have been. It's one of my favorite games on the Nintendo 64. I love me some Perfect Dark. Again, GoldenEye was great for its time, 4-player, having fun with friends. I don't think it aged that well, but great for the memories. Perfect Dark is a game I still like playing today, and I still think it's pretty cool, for being a 64 game, you know what I mean? Bomberman 64 Second Attack is Bomberman with a story. So now you play as Bomberman, you can do your bombs, you have a little side buddy too that can help you out, but you still have to blow up enemies with your bombs. The good news is with these Bomberman games, if you don't want to do the story mode, you just like old school Bomberman, nothing wrong with that. You can still play old school Bomberman with that grid and blowing the bombs and defeating the enemies. They're going to give you that too, but you have a story mode as well, so that's kind of fun. They came out with StarCraft 64. Now, I had a few friends at the time who were kind of more into PC games. Consoles were there too, but they were more about the PC stuff. And even though I did have a computer at this time, finally, I did not grow up a PC gamer. I was a console gamer my whole life. Still am. But I had some friends who were more PC gamers, and then they had better computers, and then they were more able to play games like StarCraft. So I recognized StarCraft as being a computer game, but now on the 64, so very advantageous of them. I don't think it's a complete port. I've heard that it's not exactly, it's not the optimal way to play StarCraft, first and foremost. It just gives you that option if you're not a computer gamer, but you have a Nintendo 64. But there's other things you can do, like you can do like cooperative mode and stuff like that. Again, all from only what I've read. I looked at it for a couple seconds. I've never been into the real-time strategy style games. For me, it's usually a pass, but it was a game that came out in the 64 in the year 2000. Fighters Destiny 2 comes out. Now, we talked about Fighters Destiny briefly in another video, and this is the sequel and more of the same, where it's less about taking down their health bar and more about a point system. If you throw them, that's worth so many points. If you get them to go out of bounds, it's worth so many points. Up front, when you first play it, it looks a whole lot like a Virtua Fighter. Very Virtua Fighter on the grid, you can knock them out of bounds, but then once you do a certain move, or once you counter move, or once you knock them down or something like that, that's when you get your points, and then so many points beats the stages. So, interesting take on a fighting game. It's alright. Kirby 64 comes out. It's one of my favorite Kirby games because I loved the idea that you could combine powers. I loved the idea that you could have like static shock, and then you can have fire, and you put them together, and it becomes like friction burn in a way, or or things like that. And so it was fun to see what you could create when you combine different abilities. Pretty simple for a Kirby game, slower moving than most other Kirby games, although Kirby games are usually kind of easily paced, if that makes sense. This one may be a little bit slower, but still very fun. We had a Transformers Beast Wars game. Now, I grew up with Transformers, the OG, the original, the Generation 1, and I was never into Beast Wars. Beast Wars, I was just like, I'm out. I didn't even give it a chance. But the Nintendo 64 game, I at least had a look at it, and it was just another 2D fighting game. However, in this one, you can transform both into not really a vehicle, but kind of like a vehicle, and you can also transform into your beast mode. But still, it's a fighting game, and not a very good fighting game. It's more about like you turn into things, but you're still like launching missiles and stuff at each other. It's something. It's an idea. We had Army Men Air Combat, and the Army Men game I thought was pretty fun. You play as little plastic army men turned into a video game. Hey, what a cool idea, right? Well, this one is more of the aerial version, so you can play as like a helicopter, for instance, blowing up bases, or you are delivering items or something like that. Every stage is not a very big stage. It's just enough to maneuver around and, dodge the enemy fire and stuff like that too. But, it was worth a rental, I thought. We had Carmageddon 64, and I was excited to play it because with a game like Carmageddon, first of all, the name alone sounds like fun to me. Carmageddon? Are you kidding me on this? So it's more of a racing game. I was hoping for more like Twisted Metal. Again, I love Twisted Metal. I was hoping for more of that. This is less that, more racing game, but there are people in the street that you can run over for points. So a little bit more of like the death race. Remember that? That was the thing. But no. Again, it was also worth a rental. Duck Dodgers in the 24th and a half century. I remember even at this time, again, 25 years ago, when you think about it now, I remember even at this time, I was like, do kids today who play Nintendo 64, do they even know who Duck Dodgers is? I mean, because I grew up with Looney Tunes, and I grew up with Looney Tunes, the reruns, along with whatever the newer stuff that they were doing for Looney Tunes stuff. But again, even for my time, it was mostly reruns. And they didn't do that a whole lot during this time. There was still a little bit during the year 2000, but it wasn't as prevalent, I think, or popular as Looney Tunes were in the 80s and 90s, especially like the early 90s. But either way, they made a Duck Dodgers game. It's another 3D platformer at the end of the day. You jump and you can kick with your cartoony kick, but why not? Have Marvin the Martian in it. Marvin the Martian, well, no, this is year 2000. I remember Marvin the Martian had a resurgence in like 1992, 93 or something like that. For some reason it was like super popular, again, for who knows what reason. It was like on all the t-shirts, never mind. Duck Dodgers came out in 2000. How about that? We had Hercules for the Nintendo 64. This is not the Disney Hercules. This is that live-action TV show Hercules. I was never into Hercules. I was never even really into Xena. My sisters were, so they would watch that, and it wasn't like a back-to-back block. It was like first Xena, then it's Hercules, and are they in the same universe? But they're on their own TV show? I don't know. The game was not great, and Hercules, the guy who plays Hercules, is also not great, so it came out, and I will just leave it at that. Quality investigative reporting as always with this guy here in these videos, right? Mario Tennis came out. Here's Nintendo trying to get us to do sports again. Why tennis? We had Mario Golf and then Mario Tennis. Can we get Mario Dodgeball, please? Wouldn't that be something? Was there ever even a Mario Basketball? I don't know. Well, Mario Tennis, it's tennis. It's tennis. I've played some of the tennis games, and there was a while there where like, well, no, 2000, so this would have been still year-around with Dreamcast. And what was that Dreamcast game? I know we're talking about 64, now here I am talking about Dreamcast. Virtua Tennis? What was that tennis game on the 64 that was like super popular? It was something like that. Well, anyway, here's Mario Tennis. that I don't know if it was just trying to say like, oh, hey, tennis is popular again. Let's go for that. People will just buy anything with Mario's face on it. So yeah, why not have a tennis game and just put Mario on it? We had Turok 3 Shadow of Oblivion. Now, Turok, again, I love the first Turok. Second Turok was kind of getting out of range for me, where I was just like, I just want the old school through the jungles and all that. None of this futuristic with aliens. And then Turok 3, a little bit more of that, but it did kind of bring it back a little bit, I thought. So for some reason, when Turok 3 came around, I was like, you know what? I'm going to accept it. And I'm glad I did, because Turok 3 is actually kind of decent. We had San Francisco Rush 2049, another San Francisco Rush game, this time in the future. What makes it futuristic? Well, the cars and how the cities look kind of futuristically, but not really. But it's another racing game, and people love the Rush series, so it's like, hey, why not you tweak a couple of things, and people will buy it, and they did. It's a decent racing game. If you love the Rush series, gotta have this one, man. It's one of the best. There's a game called Rat Attack that a lot of people don't really talk about for the Nintendo 64. It's a puzzle game, and I do love my puzzle games. So with Rat Attack, you play as a cat. First of all, you get to choose your cat, so that's kind of fun. And this is before cats were like internet popular. I mean, they were still popular, of course they were, but they weren't like as put up on a pedestal like they are like even now. So you get to play as a cat, and you get to catch these rats by kind of drawing a square. You know how you do like with Photoshop or a tool, like, so you start here, and then the more you stretch out, the square becomes bigger. So you create that, and that's your trap to catch the rats. And after you catch so many rats, then you move on to the next stage. And of course, other stages become more and more populated with whatever else too. But kind of a fun puzzle game. And it was cool to see a puzzle game like this come out during this time on the 64. It's like, that's great. I'll take it. We had Pokemon Puzzle League. Pokemon Puzzle League. Now we have another great 2D puzzle game that could also come out for like Game Boy and stuff like that too. But you'll have it on the Nintendo 64. Why wouldn't you? First of all, it's Pokemon. It didn't need to be Pokemon. It could be literally anything else, but why not call it Pokemon? Kind of like a match 3, but you can flip the 2 tiles at a time, and whether it's like a cross or down, I know I said a cross or down, that, sorry, the meds I'm on, a cross or down, you can eliminate those pieces, and you go like look for those combos too. So like when you eliminate these pieces and these ones fall, and then it'll create another chain of events. Very, very fun game, very addicting. I actually like this game quite a bit. Power Rangers Lightspeed Rescue. This is one of those games that not a lot of people like. First of all, it's the Power Rangers game, but not like the good Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, like the OG. It's like now it's the Light Speed or Light Force or whatever that current generation was for this time. So turn that into a video game. And then it's just not really Power Rangers-y, like you're cleaning up spills and stuff like that too. Which there's more to it. There is a little bit of mode where you can like do like Zord battles or something, and even that's a little kind of lackluster. So a lot of people, consider this, it's in a lot of those lists of like the worst games on the 64. This one comes up a lot. When you see for yourself, you might understand why.
Nuts! Rats! Trash! Curses! Bully!
We have The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, and I remember when this game came out, I wasn't interested in it as much as I love Legend of Zelda. Legend of Zelda is one of my favorite series of all time. It is for many people as well. And I loved Ocarina of Time. But when Majora's Mask came out, I couldn't tell you why. I'm trying to remember. But I was like, I had zero interest in playing it. Because I think to me it felt like it was a side story. It was like, I already played Ocarina of Time. And like, this is like, what, DLC for Ocarina of Time? It's like a little side mission, side story. It took me years to actually finally pick up a controller and play it. And then when I finally did play it, I still didn't care for it. I know a lot of people really, really like this game. If it didn't have that clock mechanic, I know, which is what makes that game. It's like, that's the gimmick behind the game, is the time mechanic where if you don't do the thing, you have to go back in time and try it all over again and stuff like that. I know that's the reason behind the game, but if it didn't have that, or if it was something else, then I would have liked this game a lot more. But man, I tried to get into it, and I just couldn't. But a lot of people really, really like this game, and they like it for their own reasons. And I do like that creepy moon. I just love playing that game and looking up and seeing this giant smile. Oh man, that was cool. That was my favorite part, was just looking up and seeing this creepy moon. And then there's a lot of other little creepy images in this game too, like when you put on the masks and you just kind of like scream in a very haunting scream kind of thing, like you actually sound like you're in trauma. We have Tigger's Honey Hunt. We have a Winnie the Pooh game starring Tigger, and again, very much so made for kids. You play as Tigger, you grab the honey, I guess. I guess you can jump. I don't know. It's Tigger. I mean, it's a Tigger game for the 64. Definitely for kids. Doesn't mean I didn't play it, but I at least played it for a little bit. Hey You Pikachu, another Pokemon game. Why not capitalize on the Pokemon game? There's like 5 Pokemon games that came out for the 64 during this year, it seems like. Hey You Pikachu was a game that required the microphone to interact with Pikachu on your Nintendo 64. I'll be honest with you, I've never played this game because I've never had the microphone to play this game for the 64. So, I don't know if it's more of an interactive experience. I don't know if there are games you can play, but I sure know you've played it. Rugrats in Paris. Boy, this is that orange VHS tape that you run across when you're looking for VHS tapes here. Rugrats in Paris. 3D kind of not really a platformer really, but like a 3D exploration. There's like little mini games you can play along the way too for people who are really into Rugrats, or even older people who were familiar with Rugrats, but it's like, oh, I'll play that as a video game. That's got to be pretty cool. It was very popular for the time, so why not check out Rugrats in Paris? And then on the flip side, you have Ogre Battle 64. Is it the best role-playing game on the Nintendo 64? Some people might think so. Ogre Battle is its own kind of thing. There was an Ogre Battle game for the Super Nintendo, and then there was Ogre Battle 64. It controls, I'm trying to think of a game that it might play similar to. Not really like Shining Force, but no, not really. I mean, it's kind of its own, there's like the battles and the words and the dialogues and the graphics I thought were really cool. It had that cool, a lot of games look like this now, but Ogre Battle was one of the first ones that I saw that looked like, it was like the illustration of the characters, and then when you go into the battle, then you can do the basic, not basic, I shouldn't say basic, but that kind of RPG style game, like JRPG, turn-based, still some strategy involved in there too. Pretty in-depth for a Nintendo 64 game, so very cool to see this at the time. Tom and Jerry Fists of Fury came out for the 64, the year 2000, middle of the year. This is one of those room environmental fighting games. So you have Tom, you have Jerry, you have other unlockable characters later as well, and it's that kind of room battle. I always think of Power Stone when I think of something like this, but it's that kind of brawling game, but in a environment, and you can like run all around and beat up the people that way. But it's a Tom and Jerry game, so of course you're beating someone up. Mickey's Speedway came out for the 64, another Mario Kart clone, this time with the Disney characters like Mickey, Minnie. You can play as Donald. I always love playing as Donald in any game where you have the option to play as Donald Duck, because he usually gets like the opposite end of whatever's cool. It always happens to Donald Duck, so always love to see that play through too. But a very good game. It actually controls very well. It's very smooth. A great kart racer if you're done with Mario Kart or want to take a break from it or something like that. Mickey's Speedway actually plays very, very well, I thought. Ready to Rumble Round 2, it's basically the second Ready to Rumble game. This one was cool too because Ready to Rumble was that boxing game, but a little bit arcadey, so it was a little bit over the top, a little cartoony. Michael Buffer's voice, the ring announcer, the Get Ready to Rumble guy, it's his voice in the game. It's actually like literally him, so that's kind of cool too. I can't even say it because it's, copyright and everything. However, I didn't like it as much as a lot of other people did, but I still enjoyed playing this game quite a bit. It was fun to see that they had another fighting game, but have it be a boxing game. And Ready to Rumble, both of the games, I mean, it's a game I wish would come back. I think it'd be really fun by today's standards for sure. Ooh, maybe in VR. That'd be kind of fun. There's already a couple boxing games in VR, but yeah, that one might be pretty cool. Midway's Greatest Hits Volume 1. They could have just called it Midway's Greatest Arcade Hits or whatever, because there's only the one volume on the 64. But this was such a great collection of arcade games that maybe this is the first time that some of these people have played these arcade versions of games without it being like the NES version, if that makes sense. Because Spy Hunter's on here. And Spy Hunter, it's the arcade version. Most people maybe have only played the NES version. But I loved Spy Hunter in the arcade. My local Tiger Mart, which was a little mini mart gas station a couple blocks from where I grew up, had Spy Hunter for years. And I always played it, man, as often as I could. So loved me some Spy Hunter, but on top of Spy Hunter, it also had Defender, it had Robotron 2084, it had Sinistar, it had Root Beer Tapper. Now, it did not have Tapper because that's Budweiser, but it had Root Beer Tapper because it's also the Nintendo 64, so you gotta go Root Beer. Very good arcade port on the 64 for Tapper. Tapper was one of my favorite games of all time. And they also had like an arcade trivia, which I thought was kind of fun. So you can actually answer questions about some of these arcade games just for fun. So all those things in one cartridge, that Midway's Arcade Classic Greatest Hits Volume 1, whatever it's called. It's the Midway Arcade Greatest Hits. I don't, you know what I mean.
WWF No Mercy comes out. So many people consider this the best wrestling game of all time. Hard to argue that. I don't agree with that because Virtual Pro Wrestling 2 exists. However, WWF No Mercy is an excellent wrestling game. It has all the things that made WrestleMania 2000 great, then made it even better. There's a few things that are still missing from some of the other wrestling games. I mean, there's some things that are missing even from like WCW NWO Revenge that aren't in No Mercy, like the ability to create a character or to have a character who goes into a fighting stance. And then instead of like doing a suplex or body slam, you're in a fighting stance and then the different buttons are different attacks, which I loved doing that for some of the shoot fighters. But again, No Mercy has so much going on for itself. It was one of the best times of professional wrestling was during this time. So it was the game to have, and anybody could pick it up and play it. Still fun today. Blues Brothers 2000 is an underrated, in my opinion, 3D platformer on the 64. I think it's a really good game. I've seen other lists, and I've seen people say like, oh, it's not as good as Mario 64. Well, that's true. However, you can't just rely on that and have that be the whole thing. I think it's a great 3D platformer. If you haven't checked it out, might want to check it out. I think it's pretty cool anyway. Banjo-Tooie comes out, so we get the sequel to Banjo-Kazooie, funnily named Banjo-Tooie, and more the same. I mean, what can you say about that? If you love the Banjo-Kazooie style game, this is what you're playing on the Nintendo 64, because I have a feeling that so many people who had a 64, and maybe this was their core system when they were younger, maybe didn't have a PlayStation, maybe didn't have the Saturn or Dreamcast by now this point. They were stuck with the 64, so Banjo-Tooie, are you going through Banjo-Kazooie? Here's more for you called Banjo-Tooie, and just kind of setting things up for Conquer, which is coming out next year, but we'll talk about that in another video. Spider-Man comes out. Now, I mostly played this on the PlayStation 1, but Spider-Man, this is not based on any movie or anything at this time. Spider-Man, the movie with Tobey Maguire comes out. Was it 2000? Oh, it was 2000. It was either 2001 or 2002. It may have been 2002. I remember because of the poster for 2001, they couldn't really show that. Anyway, this is Spider-Man based on the comics. Very fun. I love me some Spider-Man. And this is interesting because when you swing your web, it just kind of goes up into the screen as if there's a building there or something that you can't really see. So you can kind of swing wherever you want. Unlike the newer Spider-Man games now where you actually have to attach onto something that you can see in front of you or a building or something. This one you can just kind of, it's like, okay, I'm just going to swing across with, it's going to attach to a cloud. It's going to attach to a crane that you don't see. But it's still a great Spider-Man game and super, super fun. I love me as a Spider-Man game. And this one's really, really good. Scooby-Doo, Classic Creep Caper. This game is another exploration. You look around, you use items on things. It's like, oh, I'm going to use this on that. You collect the clues, you do the thing. There's several times where you play as Shaggy in this game, and Scooby-Doo is right next to you as well. And annoyingly, sometimes the other characters are just kind of hanging around. It's like, oh, we need this to go up there. And they wait for you. It's like, well, I mean, why don't you get it? You know, you're so in charge here. So it was okay. I didn't play it as long as probably other people may have, but I looked at it for a little bit. It's that Resident Evil style where the camera angle changes. So you have the camera angle set. It's almost like you're playing this game through the eyes of like security cameras, like a Resident Evil or a Silent Hill. But I'm not going to call this game a Silent Hill clone like that Piglet game that keeps on getting popular. Instead, that's just the angle. So like when you're walking around, you know, you're like, I'm going to walk over here. Then all of a sudden the screen changes and you're like walking over here and you got to change your controller method and, you know, it's all right. We get the best WWF wrestling game with No Mercy. And in the same year, a month or so later, we get WCW Backstage Assault, which is probably the worst WCW game for the Nintendo 64.
If it's injury that you want, my friend, it's injury that you're gonna get!
There is a joy with this game that's just silly. Now, it's a wrestling game, but there's no wrestling ring. WCW Backstage Assault, as the name says, you wrestle backstage. Like, there's no ring, but you're still wrestling. Like, you're still doing wrestling moves, but just you're backstage or at the loading docks or something like that. And it's just weird. And it looks ugly. The characters look crazy. It has one of those games where they also included, like, kind of the non-wrestlers in there, too. Like, you can play as Jimmy Hart. You can play as like Doug Dillinger, who was like head of security or whatever. It's like what, really? A lot of unlockables, so that's kind of cool. I like games where you have like, you know, other people you can unlock later by, you know, just by playing the game and everything like that too. It doesn't look great. Like, it looks like it came out like 6 years earlier, but it didn't. So it's unfortunate. Batman Beyond, Return of the Joker. This is another Batman game. This one's Batman Beyond. So this is like the newer Batman when you have Bruce Wayne as the older guy. It was like that version, like that cartoon or whatever, that comic, I guess Batman came from comics. I know this game a little bit. It's another game that shows up in a lot of those lists. It's kind of monotonous. It's another, like a brawler in a way, but not really a brawler. For some reason, I think like Golden Axe when I think of a game like this, where it's like you go a little bit and you fight off a couple enemies, and you go a little bit more and you fight off a couple more enemies. You might have to destroy a box to get the key to open the door and stuff like that, but I mean, for a Batman game, you want more than this. And here's Batman Beyond, and I was hoping that this game would have a lot more going on for itself. It's unfortunate. Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine, I thought was funny because this game plays a lot like Tomb Raider. And Tomb Raider is basically like an Indiana Jones style idea for Tomb Raider. And then you have an Indiana Jones game for the 64, which is actually a really decent game, but it controls like Tomb Raider. So if you loved Tomb Raider, which was inspired by Indiana Jones, and you want to play an Indiana Jones game where the gameplay is inspired by Tomb Raider, comes full circle. And here you go. And I also thought it was kind of weird because it was like Indiana Jones, but your tool menu looks way too close to like Ocarina of Time. I was like, oh, there's that. So you got your gun, you got your whip, and your ocarina. Perfect. It doesn't work that way. But that would be funny. Maybe we gotta have a mod for that or something. Star Wars Episode 1 Battle of Naboo. This is a Star Wars game where you're always behind the cockpit of something. So every stage is a different ship, which I think is kind of fun. So it might even start out, I think like the first stage you're like on a little like land speeder, but like in the city, like an escort mission. You gotta like shoot the other enemies to help your one guy, get through the town and everything like that too. But then the later stages, you're in outer space doing the basic Star Wars stuff, flying around, shooting things. Totally decent game. I do like the Star Wars games. And this one is just kind of fun because every stage you're kind of flying a different ship, which I think is pretty fun. You have Donald Duck Goin' Quackers. That's right, Donald Duck Goin' Quackers. This game is a 64 version of Crash Bandicoot. As if they had Crash Bandicoot on the 64 and you removed Crash and you put in Donald Duck, here you go. It's that kind of behind the view, walking forward from behind the shoulder. A little bit of 3D elements and everything like that too. You're attacking things, you're jumping, you're double jumping. There's a little bit where you can kind of go left and right, but not a lot with a game like this. Pretty decent to check out, pretty fun. The Disney games are usually pretty cool. They've got it with Donald Duck Goin' Quackers. It's like Crash Bandicoot, but with Donald Duck. Gotta love that. Nintendo 64, 2001. My goodness. Kicking off the year with Mega Man 64. Now, I was very curious to see what they could do with a Mega Man game in 3D. And this was the answer to that. It was more of a side story. It wasn't quite like Mega Man in 3D, but it was still Mega Man 64 in 3D. Did it have to be Mega Man? It didn't really even have to be Mega Man itself. It could have been anything else. I kind of liked the kind of blocky, I kind of liked the kind of anime looking element to this Mega Man game. So if I took myself away from it saying, okay, so it's not exactly like the 3D classic Mega Man I was expecting, it's actually kind of fun. It's actually kind of a decent game. It's interesting anyway. You still shoot with your blaster and all that too, so they didn't make any qualms about it. It wasn't like a classic, like, hey, let's make Mega Man 3D, let's just do Mega Man 64. So it's like, it's its own thing that you just gotta check out and be like, you know what, it just happens to be called Mega Man 64. You're walking around in a 3D universe, as you should be. I mean, it's, Nintendo 64, love the 3D for it. Paper Mario came out for the Nintendo 64 early in 2001. I remember when this game came out, I was like, this could work. This is just unique enough that it could work. And I remember seeing it on display somewhere where I was like, boy, this is something different. Let's take Mario and do something completely different with it. So it's paper, which has been done before. Parappa the Rapper looking very paper-like. Sure, why not? And then turn it into an RPG, that's the kicker. So it's like, okay, so it's not just a 2D paper Mario platformer, which honestly I would have preferred, but people do love their RPGs. Gotta love that. So let's make an RPG. It's not exactly Super Mario RPG, but maybe even some of those elements where you can hit the button for timing purposes. So it's not just I attack you, you attack me, we'll see what happens next. It keeps you interactive and it keeps you going too. And kind of fun that they would use like other elements in the game too. Again, a little bit like Mario RPG, but still with Paper Mario, having it be its own Paper Mario thing, which kicked off many other games in the Paper Mario series. But this is where it all started, on the Nintendo 64 back in 2001. Conker's Bad Fur Day rolls around. Boy, this game came out of nowhere. It didn't come out of nowhere, I shouldn't say that. It was surprising to me because when it finally did come out, I was like, this took a turn for the weirder, because for a while there, Conker was this very bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, quite literally, character on like what, Game Boy Color or something like that. And there's like, oh, we're going to have a Conquer game for the 64. And I thought it was going to be another, like a Banjo-Kazooie style game, you know, from Rare, the same company. It's like, okay, sure, we can do a Conquer game. And then this game comes out with the rating it had, with the attitude it had, with the crassness that it had, with the bosses that it had. It was the attitude I think it needed to be a success. I don't think it would have been as popular as it is today if it wasn't for that, because it was still kind of during that late 90s. We're in the 2001 now, but there is still a little bit of that late 90s attitude that still kind of carried over a bit. So it was like the perfect little exclamation mark for a Nintendo 64 game, and for something exclusive to the 64. I could have seen this game on like the Dreamcast. I could have even seen this game on like the PlayStation, where you could go a little bit further because they're more aged, you know, those consoles I think were more for an older demographic than the Nintendo 64 was. So the Nintendo 64 gets something like that too, and you're like, ooh, wait a minute, what's going on with the 64? Where'd that come from? It's not bad. Aiden Chronicles the First Mage, a very, very in-depth RPG for the Nintendo 64. And it's another one of those late release games, so maybe kind of gets lost in the shuffle sometimes, but there is so much going on with this game. I think it looks really good for a 64 game. I gotta put that out there. The idea that it has like so many elements that you can upgrade, and your armor and stuff like that, and the potions you can use to do different things for you and your party in this game when you're playing this game, and the exploration involved makes it a very, very in-depth game, especially for the 64, especially during this time. So Aiden Chronicles, I feel like it flies under the radar a lot of times when people are talking about games for the 64. But boy, this one's up there. We get Dr. Mario 64, and I was like, oh, that's kind of fun. I remember Dr. Mario. I'll play Dr. Mario for sure. It's funny because the cutscenes are also in that kind of paper mode, so it's almost like Paper Dr. Mario, but not really Paper Dr. Mario. It's Dr. Mario, and there's a story mode to this. Believe it or not. Not that there needs to be a story mode to this, it's Dr. Mario. But they give it a story mode to give you an idea to when you're playing the game versus the computer player or whatever, to, what do they call them, like the mega vitamins or something like that, or I don't remember. I was like, Dr. Mario with a story mode? What's the story? You just play, it's a puzzle game. But they gave it a story mode, and you can also just play Dr. Mario on it too. Very, very good game. It plays very well. It's Dr. Mario. You can't ruin it. It's the same Dr. Mario, really. Mario Party 3, we had 1 and 2, and now here's 3. There's more boards to choose from, more maps to choose from, more playable characters as well. Now you can play as Daisy. Is Waluigi in this one as well? I think so. I mean, it's funny because you play like the newest Mario Party Jamboree or whatever came out recently, and it's like there's, you know, like 20 playable characters, but in the early days, there was like, you know, 6 to 8. Now this one had 8, I believe. Very, very cool. Mario Party 3, it's a good one. The maps are okay, you know, but it was a nice thing to tide you over until the Mario Party games for the GameCube came out later. We have Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2. This is another one of those games that came out on multiple consoles. It's not just for 64. You know, I had it on PlayStation, had it on Dreamcast, whatever else. And very good game. I love the fact that it had the soundtrack as well. So it's a cartridge, but it had, you know, like the licensed music. That was one of the great things about the Tony Hawk games. They're always just fun to play, and you can always play as more than just Tony Hawk too. I recognize a couple of them. I remember Steve Caballero as being another skater on my, like, the Search for Animal Chin VHS that I had that I watched so many times. And then like some of the other characters, like I've heard of Bucky Lasik. I've heard of, you know, some of these other guys too. So it's nice because if you know Tony Hawk and you know the video games, it introduces you to these other skaters who are out there too. And this is for all of the games. So it's not just Tony Hawk. Yeah, you can play as Tony Hawk too, but it gives you that idea too. So very cool. And I mean, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2, it's more of the same. It ain't broke. Someone's hip might be broke, or their wrist or something like that, because they don't know how to fall, but it's always it's always a fun time. Love the Tony Hawk games. We have Powerpuff Girls Chemical Extraction. Again, another one of those games that on a lot of people's worst 64 games lists, this one comes up a lot. It's another one of those, there's got to be a name for this. What's that name of the Power Stone fighter? It's like a room fighter, an environmental fighter. Like, it's not just a one-on-one 2D fighter. It's like you're in a room and you can move around and pick up items and throw them, and it does not play well. It does not, I mean, it looks all right because it's Powerpuff Girls. Powerpuff Girls was, you know, the animation was pretty simple and is supposed to be. But man, it's also not fun at the end of the day. It's just kind of clunky, and it's just, you know, you could do so much with a Powerpuff Girls game. Even if it was just like a side-scrolling beat-em-up. I mean, that's always the go-to, the tried and true. But, you know, with games like Power Stone that were so popular, was Power Stone when did Power Stone come out? Maybe it wasn't, well, it had to have been out by now. because this game totally kind of rips that off. I don't know. Yeah, this game was interesting. It's on a lot of those, worst games for the 64 list for a reason. Razor Freestyle Scooter. This is that kid's game that if you wanted Tony Hawk, but your parents wouldn't get you Tony Hawk, they could get you this game. And it's a Razor scooter game that plays like a Tony Hawk game, where you can still go up the ramps and do these little tricks and everything. It's hard for me to say out loud the resurgence of the Razor scooter during this time. Remember fidget spinners? Like a few years ago? I say a few years ago, it was like, good lord, 6 or 7 years ago now. It was like that, but with Razor scooters. You would find Razor scooters everywhere. I remember my local 7-Eleven had Razor scooters for sale. I don't know why, but man, Razor scooters were everywhere and cheap. And I was like, well, we've had scooters growing up I don't know. I honestly don't know. But Razor scooters were a thing during the early 2000s, and why not make a video game out of it? So they did, and it plays like the Tony Hawk games, so there you go. And honestly, not a very long video today, because that's kind of it. I will throw in there, just for fun, in 2002, because I'm not going to give this game its own thing, Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3 comes out. So now we're into the next year. The GameCube has already been released, and we get Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3 on the Nintendo 64. For the best of my knowledge, this is the final game released for the 64, is Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3. Finally, we can play as Bam Margera. So you play Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3. It plays like the other ones. The other ones are great. Love playing the Tony Hawk games. Still do today. But 3 finally rolls around, and there we go. We got Bam Margera, who of course I know best from Jackass. It's like, oh, he's a skater too? Cool. Oh, you can play as him in this game. Great. And hey, you know what? Works for me. I like Bam. There you go. Bam's cool. He was nice to me anyway, so there's that. And with that, my friend wraps up all of the years for the Nintendo 64. We've done all of them so far. We've also done all the years for NES and Super Nintendo. Thank you for the support. Always appreciate you. Thank you much.